The winter air cut like broken glass across the iron gates of Thornwood Park, and inside those walls, England's most dangerous man sat perfectly still in the darkness. Crispin Mercer, Duke of Thornwood, didn't raise his voice when Parliament tried to destroy him. He didn't flinch when rivals whispered behind gilded fans. He simply waited, calculated, and then dismantled lives with the precision of a surgeon removing disease. They called him the Dragon Duke, not because he breathed fire, but because nothing survived his wrath once awakened. This is the story of how a man built from ice and control fell for the one woman who could never give him what he needed most. Stay until the end, drop your city in the comments, and smash that like button because what happens next will shatter every expectation you have about power, love, and revenge. Bulchmuch. The carriage wheels ground against frozen gravel as Susanna Fairfax stared through rain-streaked glass at the decaying silhouette of Blackmere House. 3 months. That's how long she'd been a widow. 3 months since cholera took Edmund and left her with nothing but debts, whispers, and the predatory attention of Sir Oswald Breck, her brother-in-law. The word tasted like poison. She stepped from the carriage into ankle-deep mud, her black mourning dress already soaked through. The house loomed above her, windows dark except for one flickering candle in the east wing where Oswald conducted his business. The business of slowly, methodically, destroying what remained of her dignity. The front door opened before she reached it. Mrs. Kimball, the housekeeper, stood in the entrance with the tight-lipped expression of a woman who knew exactly what horrors happen in this house, but lacked the power to stop them. "Your brother-in-law requests your presence in the study, ma'am." "Of course he does." Susanna handed her wet cloak to the housekeeper and walked through corridors that had once felt like home. Now they felt like a mausoleum. Edmund's portrait watched her from the wall, his gentle eyes frozen in oil paint, completely unaware that his own brother was circling his widow like a wolf around wounded prey. She found Oswald exactly where she expected, behind Edmund's desk, in Edmund's chair, drinking Edmund's brandy from Edmund's crystal decanter. He looked up when she entered, his smile sharp and deliberate. "Susanna, you look positively wretched. Grief suits you poorly." She remained standing in the doorway, refusing to move deeper into the room, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. "You summoned me. I'm here. Say what you need to say." Oswald leaned back in the leather chair, studying her the way men study horses at auction, assessing value, calculating worth, determining whether the investment merited the effort. "The estate is bankrupt. Did you know that? Edmund was a romantic fool who spent money on books and charities and the fantasy that kindness could replace strategy. He left you nothing but debts." "I'm aware. Are you also aware that as his widow, those debts now fall to you? The law protects widows from inheriting their husband's financial failures." Oswald laughed. "The law protects widows who have powerful families to enforce those protections. You have no one. Your father is dead. Your mother remarried a Scottish merchant who wants nothing to do with English scandal. You are utterly alone." Susanna's hands clenched at her sides, but her voice remained steady. "What do you want, Oswald?" He stood slowly, moving around the desk with deliberate steps. She could smell the brandy on his breath when he stopped too close, invading the space between them with casual violence. "I want what's fair. Edmund took what should have been mine. This house, this land, father's affection, and now I'm expected to simply absorb his failures while you walk away unblemished? This isn't about fairness. This is about control." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist hard enough to leave marks. "Smart girl." "Yes. This is about control. And here's what's going to happen. You will sign over your widow's rights to Blackmere House. You will publicly acknowledge that Edmund's debts are your responsibility, and you will accept my generous offer to remain here as my guest until suitable arrangements can be made for your future." She yanked her wrist free, fire replacing fear. "I will do none of those things. Then I will destroy you. I will spread rumors that you drove Edmund to financial ruin. I will ensure every door in London slams in your face. I will make certain that your only choice is the workhouse or the streets. Do what you must. I won't surrender to you." Oswald's smile turned cold. "We'll see how long that defiance lasts when you're sleeping in doorways." Susanna fled Blackmere House that night with nothing but the clothes on her back and 17 pounds hidden in her corset. She took a room at a boarding house on the edge of London, a cramped space that smelled like boiled cabbage and desperation. For 3 weeks, she searched for employment. For 3 weeks, every door closed. Every interview ended the same way: a sympathetic look, a regretful shake of the head, a whispered comment about scandal and reputation. Oswald's poison was already working its way through society's bloodstream. She was standing in the rain outside a shop that had just refused her application when the black carriage appeared. Sleek, expensive, the kind of transportation that belonged to men who shaped kingdoms instead of merely inhabiting them. The door opened. A voice emerged from the shadowed interior, low and precise and completely devoid of warmth. "Mrs. Fairfax, get in." She should have run. Every instinct screamed danger, but rain was soaking through her worn boots and she had 4 pounds left and nowhere else to go. She climbed inside. The man sitting across from her radiated power the way fire radiates heat. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair cut military short and eyes like winter storms. His face was all sharp angles and aristocratic severity. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, the only imperfection in otherwise brutal perfection. Crispin Mercer, Duke of Thornwood, the Dragon Duke himself. He studied her with the same calculating intensity she'd seen in Oswald, but where her brother-in-law's gaze held predatory hunger, the Duke's held only cold assessment. "You're being destroyed by Sir Oswald Breck." It wasn't a question. "That's none of your concern, Your Grace." Wrong. It became my concern when he started using your destruction to strengthen his position in Parliament. Oswald is a parasite who's made enemies of better men than himself. Your ruin is simply his latest weapon. What do you want from me? The Duke's expression didn't change. "I want to offer you a solution to your problem." "Marriage," Susanna laughed, the sound sharp and broken. "I've already experienced marriage, Your Grace." It ended poorly. "This wouldn't be that kind of marriage. This would be a transaction. You need protection, resources, and social standing that Oswald cannot touch. I need an heir to preserve the Thornwood bloodline." She stared at him, searching for deception and finding only brutal honesty. "Why me? You could marry anyone. I could marry a simpering debutante who would spend my fortune on gowns and gossip. I could marry an heiress who would demand affection I don't possess. Or I could marry a woman who understands that power is the only currency that matters in this world. A woman who won't mistake necessity for romance. And what happens when I fail to produce this heir you require?" His eyes narrowed slightly. "Do you have reason to believe you cannot conceive?" The question landed like a blade between her ribs. She thought about the physician who'd examined her after 3 years of childless marriage to Edmund. The quiet diagnosis delivered with clinical detachment. The certainty that her body would never cooperate with aristocratic expectations. She should tell him the truth right now. Confession would save them both from inevitable disappointment. But Oswald was hunting her. The workhouse was waiting. And this cold, terrifying man was offering her survival. No reason at all. The lie tasted like ash. The Duke nodded once. "Then we have an agreement. You will become Duchess of Thornwood. You will manage the household, attend social functions, and fulfill the duties required of your position. In return, you will have my protection, my resources, and my name. No affection, no illusions, simply mutual benefit. And if I refuse, Oswald will destroy you within a month. I give you my word on that. Why do you care what happens to me?" For the first time, something shifted in the Duke's expression. Not warmth exactly, more like the shadow of old anger. "I don't. But I care about predators like Oswald believing they can devour the vulnerable without consequence. Consider this marriage my way of burning down his hunting ground." Susanna looked at the man across from her. The Dragon Duke, the most feared aristocrat in England, a man who destroyed rivals with the same casual efficiency other men used to drink tea. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt something far more dangerous. Hope. "When do we begin?" Bucky's. They married 4 days later in a private ceremony that shocked London society like lightning striking Parliament. No courtship, no announcement, just brutal efficiency and legal documents signed with aristocratic precision. Susanna became Duchess of Thornwood before most of England even knew the Duke was considering marriage. Oswald sent 17 letters in the first week, each one angrier than the last, each one shredded unread by the Duke's staff. The final letter arrived with a threat. "This isn't over. You've made a powerful enemy. Crispin read it once, then burned it in the library fireplace while Susanna watched. Oswald mistakes noise for power. Men like him always do. Aren't you concerned he'll retaliate? The Duke's smile was cold and absolute. I'm counting on it. Eek. Thornwood Park rose from the English countryside like a monument to inherited dominance. Endless marble corridors, candlelit galleries lined with portraits of merciless ancestors. Vast libraries where political futures were decided with a single signature. The estate reflected its master perfectly. Magnificent, controlled, emotionally impenetrable. Susanna arrived at sunset, watching the massive structure emerge from winter mist like something from Gothic literature. The servants lined up in perfect formation, their faces carefully neutral as they assessed the new Duchess. Mrs. Holloway, the head housekeeper, curtsied with military precision. Welcome to Thornwood Park, Your Grace. His Grace has instructed us to accommodate your every need. Thank you. She followed Mrs. Holloway through corridors that felt more like museums than homes. Every surface gleamed. Every painting was positioned with geometric accuracy. No warmth. No disorder. No evidence that human beings actually lived inside these walls. Her rooms occupied the entire east wing. Bedroom, sitting room, private library. Dressing room larger than the entire boarding house she'd fled weeks earlier. Mrs. Holloway gestured to the wardrobe already filled with gowns Susanna hadn't chosen. His Grace took the liberty of ensuring your wardrobe reflects your new position. If anything displeases you, simply inform me and adjustments will be made immediately. Susanna ran her hand across silk and velvet, each piece worth more than she'd owned in her entire previous life. This is unnecessary. His Grace disagrees. After Mrs. Holloway departed, Susanna stood alone in rooms designed to communicate one message clearly. You belong to Thornwood now. Dinner that first night happened in a dining room built to seat 40 people. Instead, only two place settings existed. One at the head of the table where Crispin sat reviewing documents while servants delivered 7 courses. One to his right where Susanna picked at food too rich for her anxious stomach. He didn't look up from his papers. You'll attend Lady Ashworth's gathering next week. Parliament wives will be watching to see if you're capable of managing your position. I've managed households before. Not households that shape legislation and destroy reputations before breakfast. She set down her fork. Are you always this pleasant during meals? For the first time, he looked at her directly. His expression remained unreadable. This isn't about pleasantness. This is about ensuring you understand what's required. You're Duchess of Thornwood now. Every word you speak will be analyzed, every gesture interpreted, every weakness exploited by people who would burn this estate to ash if they sensed vulnerability. I understand. Do you? Because the women you'll face next week have spent decades perfecting the art of social destruction. They will smile while cutting you apart. They will befriend you while collecting ammunition. They will test you in 1,000 subtle ways, and if you fail even once, Oswald will use it to question the legitimacy of this marriage. Then I won't fail. Something shifted in his expression. Not approval exactly, more like recognition. We'll see. He returned to his documents, effectively dismissing her from conversation. Susanna finished her wine in silence, watching this strange, cold man who'd rescued her from ruin without expecting gratitude in return. That night, lying alone in rooms larger than entire houses, she wondered what kind of childhood creates a man who views marriage as tactical warfare. The weeks that followed established a rhythm as precise as clockwork. Crispin left for London 3 days each week to conduct parliamentary business. Susanna managed Thornwood Park with efficiency that surprised even Mrs. Holloway. She reviewed household accounts, interviewed staff, reorganized the library catalog, addressed tenant complaints the previous Duchess had ignored for years. The servants stopped whispering behind her back. Tenants started approaching her directly with concerns. Thornwood Park began functioning like an estate instead of a monument, but the Duke himself remained unknowable. He acknowledged her management with brief nods. He attended dinners in silence. He answered questions with single sentences designed to end conversation rather than encourage it. Their only real interactions happened during strategy sessions before social events. Lady Ashworth will ask about your family. Deflect without appearing evasive. Lord Pemberton will question your knowledge of literature. He's testing whether you're an educated partner or decorative burden. Mrs. Blackwood will invite you to charitable committees. Accept. It demonstrates social integration. He prepared her the way generals prepare soldiers for battle. Thorough, ruthless, completely impersonal. Until the night everything changed. Susanna found him in the library at midnight, surrounded by ledgers and maps and documents stamped with parliamentary seals. He didn't acknowledge her entrance, his attention locked on whatever crisis consumed his focus. She should have left. Privacy was sacred in this house. Instead, she moved closer. What are you working on? Destroying a man who believes purchasing votes makes him untouchable. His voice was flat, clinical, completely devoid of emotion. She looked at the documents spread across his desk. Financial records, witness statements, legal precedents. Every piece of evidence organized with surgical precision. This is about more than politics. He finally looked up, and for one unguarded second she saw something raw in his expression. When I was 8 years old, I watched my mother beg my father for money to buy food for our tenants during a harvest failure. He laughed at her, called her weak, told her compassion was a luxury aristocrats couldn't afford. She died believing she'd failed them. Susanna's breath caught. How did she die? Fever. But it was really humiliation that killed her. She stopped fighting after that conversation. Stopped believing her voice mattered. And your father? Dead 10 years now. Heart failure. Died screaming about protecting the family legacy. Crispin's smile was blade sharp. I burned every portrait of him 3 hours after his funeral. The confession hung between them, raw and unexpected. Susanna sat in the chair across from his desk, abandoning propriety completely. Is that why you do this? Why you destroy men like Oswald? He studied her with those winter storm eyes. I destroy men like Oswald because weakness invites cruelty. My mother was kind, gentle, everything society claims to value in women. And powerful men devoured her alive because kindness without power is just prey wearing a pretty dress. So you became the predator instead. No, I became the dragon. There's a difference. She leaned forward. What difference? Predators hunt for pleasure. Dragons burn threats to ash because that's what's necessary to protect what matters. And what matters to you? For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he closed the ledger in front of him with deliberate finality. I haven't decided yet. Something shifted after that night. Not warmth exactly. More like recognition between two people who'd survived different versions of the same war. Crispin started asking her opinion during estate meetings. Started trusting her judgment over titled men twice her age. Started inviting her into conversations about strategy and politics and the 1,000 small decisions that shaped Thornwood's power. She discovered he was brilliant, not just intelligent, genuinely, terrifyingly brilliant in ways that made other men look like children playing at dominance. He also discovered she wasn't intimidated by his reputation. One afternoon during a meeting with Thornwood's solicitors, one of them made a condescending comment about women's inability to understand complex legal structures. Susanna corrected him with precision that left the room silent. Crispin dismissed the entire legal team 10 minutes later and hired new solicitors who'd actually passed their examinations instead of purchasing their positions. That evening, he poured her wine without being asked. You made Harrison weep. He deserved it. The Duke's smile was genuine for the first time since their wedding. Yes, he did. Winter melted into spring. The estate transformed from frozen severity into something almost beautiful. Gardens bloomed. Tenants celebrated successful harvests. Thornwood Park felt less like a fortress and more like the home it was supposed to be. And Susanna felt her carefully maintained emotional distance beginning to crumble, because Crispin Mercer, Duke of Thornwood, the dragon who terrified Parliament, had started looking at her differently. Not with cold assessment, with something far more dangerous. Interest. She caught him watching her during dinner, his expression thoughtful instead of distant. She noticed how he positioned himself between her and potential threats at social gatherings. She felt the way his hand would settle briefly on her lower back when guiding her through crowds, proprietary and protective at once. And God help her, she wanted more, which was the most dangerous complication possible, because every month that passed without pregnancy drove the knife of guilt deeper into her chest. She'd lied to him, built their entire marriage on deception, taken his protection knowing she could never fulfill the one requirement he'd clearly stated. The physician's words haunted her dreams. I'm sorry, Mrs. Fairfax. Some women simply cannot conceive. It's no one's fault. It's simply how your body functions. She should confess, should tell Crispin the truth before this went any further. But she was falling in love with a man who'd married her for an heir she couldn't provide. And confessing felt like signing her own death warrant. The crisis came during a spring storm that turned Thornwood Park's gardens into rivers of mud. Susanna was searching for a book on estate management when she accidentally wandered into Crispin's private study, a room forbidden to everyone except the Duke himself. The door was unlocked. She should have left immediately. Instead, she stepped inside. The study was smaller than expected, more personal. Leather chairs worn comfortable instead of kept pristine for show. Shelves lined with books actually read instead of displayed. A desk covered in correspondence and ledgers and the organized chaos of a man who actually worked instead of delegating everything to subordinates. And there, half hidden beneath papers concerning parliamentary votes, she saw a folder marked with her maiden name, Fairfax Investigation. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were detailed reports on everything: her marriage to Edmund, her father's death, her mother's remarriage, Oswald's financial crimes, the physician visits, Wait. She read the dates again. The investigation had been completed 3 weeks before Crispin proposed marriage. He'd known. He'd known Oswald was hunting her, known she was trapped, known she would eventually be cornered into submission or destruction. Their marriage hadn't been opportunity. It had been rescue. But the medical records weren't there. The folder contained everything except proof of her infertility, which meant either Crispin's investigator had missed it or... Thunder crashed outside as the study door opened behind her. She turned to find the Duke standing in the entrance, rain-soaked and furious and completely focused on the folder in her hands. Put that down. His voice was winter itself. You investigated me. Of course I investigated you. I investigate everyone. Before proposing marriage? Before offering rescue? Something dangerous flickered in his expression. I offered you a transaction, nothing more. Liar. The word landed between them like a thrown gauntlet. Crispin crossed the study in 3 strides, towering over her with barely controlled fury. You have no idea what you're talking about, don't I? This investigation proves you knew exactly what Oswald intended. You married me to destroy him, not because you needed an heir. I married you for both reasons. No. You married me because you can't stand watching predators destroy vulnerable women, because your mother died believing she was worthless, and you've spent your entire life making sure no other woman suffers the same fate. His hand slammed against the desk beside her, rattling inkwells. You don't know anything about my mother. I know you burned your father's portraits. I know you destroy men who prey on the weak. I know you married a widow with nothing to offer except the satisfaction of ruining her brother-in-law's plans. Susanna, and I know I've been lying to you since the moment we met. The confession exploded out of her like poison finally purged. Silence consumed the study. Crispin's expression went absolutely still. What did you say? I can't give you an heir. I'm barren. A physician confirmed it years ago. I knew before I accepted your proposal, and I said nothing because I was desperate and terrified, and I thought one lie wouldn't matter compared to survival. Her voice broke completely. But it matters. It matters because you've been kind to me, because you've trusted me, because somewhere in this cold, brutal arrangement, I started falling in love with you. And every day I don't confess feels like another betrayal. Thunder filled the silence between them. Then Crispin Mercer, Duke of Thornwood, the man who'd built himself into England's most dangerous aristocrat, did something completely unexpected. He started laughing, not cruel mockery, genuine, exhausted laughter. You magnificent fool! He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her with sudden fierce intensity. I knew. She froze. What? The medical records were in a separate file. I've known since before proposing marriage. Then why? Because I didn't care. He pulled back just enough to look at her directly, his expression raw and unguarded for the first time since they'd met. I married you because you were intelligent, capable, and exactly what Thornwood Park needed. The heir was an excuse, a way to justify wanting you without admitting I was making an emotional decision. You wanted me? His hand cupped her face with unexpected gentleness. From the moment you climbed into my carriage looking like drowned fury and refused to beg for my help. Outside, lightning split the sky. Inside, every barrier between them finally shattered. When Crispin kissed her, it wasn't gentle or careful or anything resembling aristocratic restraint. It was possession and desperation and relief that deception was finally over. Susanna kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his wet shirt, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she managed one question. What happens now? Now, he said, voice rough. Oswald learns what happens when someone threatens what belongs to me. And before Susanna could ask what he meant, the study door burst open. Mrs. Holloway stood in the entrance, her face pale with terror. Your Grace, Sir Oswald has arrived with parliamentary guards. He's demanding entrance under authority of a legal writ claiming fraud in your marriage contract. Crispin's expression went absolutely cold. The dragon had awakened, and Susanna realized with sudden, terrible clarity that this was exactly the moment he'd been waiting for. Oswald had finally made his move. Now England's most dangerous duke would show him why predators should never hunt inside the dragon's territory. Crispin didn't move, didn't blink. The rage that would have consumed lesser men transformed into something far more dangerous in him. Calculation. Cold, absolute calculation that turned fury into surgical precision. He looked at Susanna once, his hand still cupping her face. Stay here. It wasn't a request. Then he walked out of the study with the controlled grace of a predator who'd finally been given permission to hunt. Susanna followed anyway, because she'd spent her entire life watching powerful men destroy women by excluding them from the rooms where decisions were made. And she'd be damned if she'd hide in the study while her husband faced the monster who'd haunted her nightmares. The main hall of Thornwood Park had transformed into a battlefield. Oswald stood in the center surrounded by 6 parliamentary guards, all armed, all wearing the smug expressions of men who believed legal authority made them untouchable. Her brother-in-law had aged poorly since their last encounter. His face was flushed with alcohol and rage, his expensive coat unable to hide the softness of a man who'd never worked for anything in his life. Behind him stood Lord Chancellor Pemberton, a political rival Crispin had humiliated during a vote on agricultural reform 3 months prior. Revenge dressed as legal procedure. Oswald's smile widened when he saw Susanna emerge from the corridor behind Crispin. There she is, the fraudulent Duchess herself. Crispin descended the marble staircase with deliberate slowness, each step measured, each movement designed to communicate one message clearly. You've made a fatal mistake entering my home uninvited. His voice was conversational, almost pleasant, which made it infinitely more terrifying. Oswald pulled a document from his coat, waving it like a weapon. This is a writ signed by 3 members of Parliament authorizing investigation into your marriage contract. There's evidence suggesting you knowingly married a barren woman to secure political advantage while committing fraud against the institution of aristocratic succession. Crispin reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped 3 feet from Oswald. The difference in their physical presence was stark. Oswald looked like what he was, a soft bureaucrat playing at power. Crispin looked like violence barely restrained by expensive tailoring. Evidence. How fascinating. What evidence? Lord Pemberton stepped forward, his reedy voice full of self-importance. Medical records indicating the Duchess was diagnosed as infertile years before your marriage. Testimony from servants at Blackmere House confirming she was aware of this diagnosis. Financial records showing you paid substantial sums to acquire her late husband's debts, effectively purchasing her cooperation. Every word was calculated to destroy, to humiliate, to reduce Susanna to a transaction while painting Crispin as a fool who'd been manipulated. But the Duke's expression never changed. Is that all? Oswald's confidence faltered slightly. All? That's more than sufficient to annul your marriage and strip her of the Thornwood name. She deceived you, used you, and now Parliament has grounds to question whether you're fit to maintain your seat given your obvious lack of judgment. Crispin looked at the guards, at Pemberton, at Oswald. Then he smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Susanna had ever seen. Not cruel, not angry, just absolutely certain. You pathetic fool, you actually believed this would work. He turned to Mrs. Holloway, who stood frozen near the entrance. Bring the files from my London office, the ones marked Breck Investigation. The housekeeper vanished immediately. Oswald's face went pale. What files? Crispin circled him slowly, a dragon assessing prey. The files documenting 7 years of embezzlement from widows across 3 counties. The witness statements from servants you threatened into silence. The financial records showing you've been stealing from estate funds and blaming failures on your dead brother. The evidence proving you've been running an extortion scheme targeting vulnerable women for the better part of a decade. You're blundering. Am I? Then why are you sweating? Mrs. Holloway returned with 3 leather folders, each one thick with documents. Crispin opened the first one and began reading aloud with clinical precision. Mrs. Eleanor Ashcroft, widow. You convinced her to invest in a shipping venture that never existed. Stole £40,000. When she threatened exposure, you destroyed her reputation by spreading rumors about mental instability. That's a lie. Crispin pulled out a signed confession from Oswald's former secretary. Mr. Davies was quite talkative once I explained the alternative to cooperation was prosecution as an accomplice. He kept meticulous records, including your handwritten instructions on how to fabricate the shipping documents. He opened the second folder. Mrs. Catherine Pembroke, widow. You seduced her under false promises of marriage, then blackmailed her with intimate letters she'd written, extracted £20,000 before she took her own life. Oswald lunged forward. You can't prove any of this. Crispin caught his wrist with casual strength, twisting until Oswald gasped in pain. I can prove all of it, every fraud, every theft, every woman you destroyed because you're too weak to earn power legitimately. He released Oswald with contempt. Lord Pemberton stepped forward, his voice shaking slightly. Even if these allegations are true, they don't address the fraud in your own marriage. The Duchess knowingly deceived you about her ability to produce an heir. Crispin's laugh was sharp and cold. She deceived no one. I knew about her infertility before proposing marriage. It was in the investigation file I commissioned 3 weeks before our first conversation. Silence crashed through the hall. Susanna's breath caught. He was admitting it, publicly, in front of witnesses who would spread this confession across London by morning. Oswald found his voice first. Then why marry her? Why risk your bloodline for a woman who can give you nothing? And there it was. The question that exposed everything aristocracy valued. Bloodlines over people, legacy over love, power over humanity. Crispin looked directly at Susanna when he answered. Because I'd rather lose my bloodline than my integrity. Because watching predators like you destroy vulnerable women is more offensive to me than any threat to the Thornwood name. Because she's worth more than 100 heirs raised in a household built on cruelty and fear. He turned back to Oswald. You want to know why I really married her? Because the moment I watched you try to corner her into submission, I decided your destruction was worth any cost, including my own legacy. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Oswald's face twisted with rage and desperation. You're insane! You've destroyed your own position for a woman who can't even fulfill the basic requirement of aristocratic marriage. No, I've destroyed your position by making you believe you had leverage. Every move you've made since my wedding has been carefully orchestrated. The rumors you spread? I let them circulate. The parliamentary allies you convinced to support this investigation. I bought their cooperation weeks ago. Even this dramatic entrance with guards and legal writs? I ensured Pemberton would recommend it. Pemberton went white. What? Crispin's smile was blade sharp. You really thought you orchestrated this? I've been feeding you information for months, leading you exactly where I needed you. Because the only way to permanently destroy men like Oswald is to let them commit their crimes in public view with undeniable evidence. He gestured to the guards. Every one of these men is loyal to the Crown, not Parliament. And the Crown has been very interested in Oswald's activities since I presented evidence 3 weeks ago. They're not here to investigate my marriage. They're here to arrest him. The head guard stepped forward, pulling iron shackles from his belt. Sir Oswald Breck, you're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, extortion, and conspiracy to commit blackmail. By order of the Crown. Oswald stumbled backward, his face collapsing into panic. No, this is impossible. Pemberton, do something. But Pemberton was already backing toward the door, realizing too late that he'd been weaponized against himself. Crispin's voice stopped him cold. Leave now, and I'll let you slink back to your estate in disgrace. Stay and try to defend this piece of filth. And tomorrow morning, every scandal you've buried for the past 20 years becomes public record. Pemberton fled. The guards seized Oswald, shackling him with efficient brutality. Her brother-in-law fought like a trapped animal, screaming threats that dissolved into begging as they dragged him toward the entrance. Wait, Susanna, please, tell them this is madness. I'm family. Susanna walked forward until she stood directly in front of him. For 3 months after Edmund's death, this man had tormented her, hunted her, reduced her to prey. Now he was the one begging. You were never family. You were a predator who mistook kindness for weakness. And now you're learning the difference between power and cruelty. Oswald's face twisted with hate. You'll regret this. Both of you, I have allies, resources. You can't destroy me. Crispin moved beside Susanna, his presence overwhelming. I already have. Every asset you possess has been seized by the crown. Every ally has abandoned you. Every reputation you've hidden behind has been dismantled. By this time tomorrow, your name will be synonymous with the worst kind of aristocratic corruption. The guards hauled Oswald toward the door. His screams echoed through Thornwood Park until the massive oak doors slammed shut, cutting off his voice mid-threat. Silence flooded back. Susanna stood in the center of the hall, trembling with adrenaline and shock, and something that felt dangerously close to vindication. Crispin dismissed the remaining staff with a gesture, waiting until they were completely alone before speaking. Are you all right? She laughed, the sound half broken. You just destroyed my brother-in-law, exposed a parliamentary conspiracy, and publicly declared you married me knowing I was barren. I'm not sure all right covers what I'm feeling. He moved closer, his expression softening slightly. Regret? No. Relief, terror, gratitude, but not regret. Good, because what comes next will be worse. Susanna looked up at him sharply. What comes next? He guided her toward the library, away from the hall still echoing with Oswald's destruction. Once they were inside with doors closed, he poured 2 glasses of brandy with hands that were completely steady, despite having just orchestrated a man's complete annihilation. Oswald was a symptom. The disease is aristocratic entitlement. Men like him exist because society protects predators and punishes victims. What I just did will send shockwaves through Parliament, because you admitted you don't care about producing an heir, because I admitted love matters more than legacy. He handed her the brandy. Every rival I've ever crushed, every enemy I've destroyed, every political victory I've won, all of it was built on the perception that I'm a ruthless strategist who values power above everything else. That reputation kept me untouchable. And now? Now they know I'm vulnerable, that I'll sacrifice legacy for the woman I married, that the Dragon Duke can be hurt through emotional attachments. Susanna's hand tightened on the glass. You're saying I've made you weak. No. I'm saying loving you has made me human. And in aristocratic circles, humanity is the most dangerous weakness of all. He sat in the leather chair facing the fireplace, exhaustion finally showing in the lines around his eyes. Tomorrow morning, every ambitious politician in London will start planning how to use you against me. Every social rival will target you to wound me. Every predator who spent years afraid of my reputation will suddenly see opportunity. Then we fight them. Crispin looked at her with something raw in his expression. You don't understand what that means. These people don't fight fair. They'll spread rumors that destroy reputations. They'll create scandals from nothing. They'll make your life hell until I either bend to their will or watch you suffer. Let them try. Susanna crossed to him, setting down her glass and taking his hands. I survived Oswald. I survived being widowed and hunted and reduced to nothing. I climbed into your carriage knowing you were the most dangerous man in England, and I did it anyway. Do you really think I'm afraid of politicians and society gossip? You should be. Maybe. But I'm more afraid of living as the woman who made the Dragon Duke weak, who turned England's most powerful aristocrat into something his enemies could exploit. She leaned closer, holding his gaze. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to show them that loving me didn't make you weak. It made you absolutely terrifying. Because now you're not just fighting for power or legacy. You're fighting for something you actually value. And men who have something worth protecting are far more dangerous than men who have nothing left to lose. Something shifted in Crispin's expression. The exhaustion burned away, replaced by the cold calculation that had built his reputation. You magnificent, terrifying woman. He pulled her down into his lap, one hand threading through her hair. You realize this makes you complicit in everything that comes next. Every enemy I destroy, every reputation I annihilate, every political rival I crush. Good. When he kissed her this time, it wasn't desperate or relieved. It was claiming, absolute and possessive, and filled with the promise of violence against anyone who threatened what they'd built. When they finally broke apart, Susanna managed one question. "What's the first move?" Crispin's smile was pure predatory satisfaction. "Lady Ashworth's gathering is tomorrow night. Every important family in London will be there. We're going to walk in together, and you're going to show them exactly what kind of duchess you are, which is the kind who married the dragon and learned to breathe fire herself." The next evening transformed Thornwood Park into controlled chaos. Servants prepared Susanna's wardrobe while Mrs. Holloway coordinated timing with military precision. The gown Crispin had selected was deep crimson silk that hugged every curve before flowing into a train designed to command attention. Susanna stared at herself in the mirror while her lady's maid worked miracles with her hair. "This is armor, isn't it?" Mrs. Holloway's reflection smiled. "His Grace understands that battles are won before swords are drawn. You'll walk into that gathering and every woman will know immediately that you're not prey. And the men, they'll look at you and understand that touching you means war with the Duke, which is another way of saying suicide." The carriage ride to Lady Ashworth's estate was silent. Crispin sat across from her, watching London blur past the windows with an expression that revealed nothing. Susanna broke the silence first. "Tell me what to expect." He looked at her directly. "3 types of people will approach you tonight. The first will be ambitious climbers who want to assess whether friendship with you grants access to me. Polite, but calculating. You'll recognize them because they'll compliment your dress before asking invasive questions about our marriage. How do I handle them? Deflect. Give them nothing personal. Keep conversation focused on neutral topics. Estate management, literature, anything that demonstrates intelligence without revealing vulnerability. And the second type? Enemies pretending to be allies. These are more dangerous. They'll seem warm and welcoming. They'll invite you to social events and charitable committees. They'll gather information slowly, building trust before using it against you. How do I identify them? You can't. Not immediately. That's what makes them effective. My advice is to trust no one completely until they've proven themselves over time. Susanna absorbed this. And the third type? Genuine allies. People who've been victimized by the same predators I've destroyed. Widows who've survived men like Oswald. Women trapped in marriages to cruel aristocrats. They'll recognize you as someone who understands their position. How will I know them? They won't ask questions about me. They'll ask questions about you, your interests, your background, your opinions. They'll treat you like a person instead of a strategic asset. The carriage slowed as they approached the Ashworth estate, its windows blazing with candlelight and music spilling into the night. Crispin leaned forward. "One more thing. No matter what happens tonight, no matter what's said or implied, remember that I chose you. Not because I needed an heir, not because you were convenient, because the moment you refused to beg for my help, I recognized something I'd never encountered before." "What?" "Someone as stubborn and dangerous as I am." The carriage stopped. Footmen opened the doors, and suddenly they were walking up marble steps into a world designed to destroy anyone who showed weakness. Lady Ashworth's gathering was exactly as brutal as Susanna expected. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and aristocratic wealth. 200 of London's most powerful families circulated in carefully choreographed patterns, alliances forming and dissolving with each conversation. Every head turned when the Duke and Duchess of Thornwood entered. Whispers ignited like brush fire. Women leaned toward each other behind fans. Men exchanged significant glances. The entire room recalibrated around their presence. Lady Ashworth herself approached immediately, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Your Grace." "Duchess." What an unexpected pleasure. We'd heard rumors of difficulties, but clearly those were exaggerated. Difficulties was aristocratic code for Oswald's arrest and the scandal it created. Crispin's response was ice smooth. "Rumors are the currency of the insecure, Lady Ashworth. We prefer dealing in certainties." "Of course." And the Duchess looks absolutely radiant. "Marriage clearly agrees with you, my dear." The endearment was designed to infantilize, to reduce Susanna to decorative attachment. Susanna smiled with deliberate warmth. "Indeed. His Grace has been remarkably patient, teaching me how to identify predators disguised as polite society. It's a fascinating education." Lady Ashworth's expression froze for half a second before recovering. "How intriguing. You must share your insights sometime." She moved away quickly. unnerved. Crispin's hand settled on Susanna's lower back, barely touching, but absolutely possessive. Well done. You just made her question every interaction she's planned for tonight. The evening proceeded in waves of carefully managed warfare. The ambitious climbers approached exactly as predicted. Compliments about her dress followed by questions about the Duke's political plans. Susanna deflected with practiced ease, giving them nothing substantive while maintaining polite conversation. Then came the predators. Lord Harrington cornered her near the refreshment table while Crispin was engaged in conversation with parliamentary allies across the room. Harrington was 60, wealthy, and known for collecting young mistresses he discarded once their novelty faded. Duchess, you're even more lovely than the rumors suggested. The Duke is a fortunate man. His gaze traveled over her body with insulting slowness. Susanna's smile never wavered. And you're exactly as predictable as your reputation promised, Lord Harrington. His expression darkened. Careful, my dear. You're new to these circles. It would be unfortunate if you made enemies before establishing yourself. I already have enemies. The difference is mine are worth the effort. She walked away before he could respond, her heart pounding, but her expression serene. The real test came 2 hours into the evening when Mrs. Catherine Blackwood approached with 3 other wealthy widows. Blackwood was legendary in London society. Sharp, political, and utterly ruthless in protecting her own interests. Duchess Thornwood. Might we steal you for a moment? Susanna nodded, following them to a quieter alcove away from the main ballroom. Blackwood studied her with calculating intensity. We've been watching you tonight. The way you handled Harrington, the way you deflected Ashworth's probing. You're either remarkably well-trained or naturally gifted at navigating predators. My late husband taught me that polite society is often the most dangerous battlefield. Smart man, unlike most aristocrats who mistake privilege for intelligence. One of the other women, Lady Pembroke, leaned forward. We wanted to warn you about something. There's a rumor circulating that certain members of Parliament intend to challenge the Duke's seat by questioning the legitimacy of your marriage. They're planning to use your infertility as evidence of fraud. Susanna's expression remained neutral despite the knife of anxiety twisting in her chest. Let them try. My husband anticipated this months ago. Blackwood smiled, genuine approval in her eyes. Good. Most new duchesses would panic or deny. You understand this is war. I understand that powerful men feel entitled to destroy women who refuse to submit. I also understand that I married a man who spent his entire life burning predators alive. The women exchanged glances. Lady Pembroke spoke again. Then you should also understand something else. Not everyone in London society supports the old guard. Some of us have been waiting years for someone like the Duke to challenge the system. And some of us recognize that a duchess who married him knowing she was infertile is exactly the kind of ally we need. Why? Because it proves you value integrity over legacy. And women who value integrity are far more dangerous to corrupt aristocrats than women who value bloodlines. Blackwood handed her a card with an address embossed in silver. This is my London residence. Every third Thursday, a group of women meet there. Widows. Wives trapped in abusive marriages. Women trying to protect their daughters from predatory matches. We share information. Protect each other. Destroy men who think they're untouchable. She paused. You'd be welcome to join us. Susanna took the card, understanding immediately what was being offered. Not just social alliance, actual power. I'll be there. After the women departed, Crispin materialized beside her with uncanny timing. What did Blackwood want? Susanna showed him the card. She offered me entrance into a network of women who've been fighting the same battles we are. Widows. Victims of aristocratic abuse. Women with resources and motivation to destroy predators. Crispin studied the card, then smiled with cold satisfaction. Catherine Blackwood is one of the most politically connected women in England. If she's offering you access to her network, it means she believes you're worth the investment, or she wants to use me to get to you. Both are probably true. The question is whether the alliance is worth the risk. Susanna looked at this ballroom filled with people who were already planning how to destroy them. Then she looked at her husband, the Dragon Duke who'd married her knowing she could never give him an heir. Everything worth having involves risk. You taught me that. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining with casual possessiveness. Then we accept, and we start building an alliance that makes us absolutely untouchable. The evening ended without further incident, but the damage was already done. By the time their carriage returned to Thornwood Park, Susanna knew the battle lines had been drawn. Some of London's aristocracy would support them, others would plot their destruction, and everyone would be watching to see if the Dragon Duke's emotional vulnerability could be weaponized. That night, lying in Crispin's arms in the massive bed they now shared, Susanna finally asked the question that had haunted her since his public confession.
Do you regret admitting you knew about my infertility? That you chose me anyway?
He was quiet for a long moment, his hand moving slowly through her hair. No, but I recognize what it cost. Every enemy I've ever made now knows exactly how to hurt me. They'll come after you to wound me. They'll spread rumors designed to destroy your reputation because damaging you damages my position. I can handle rumors. Can you handle seeing your name dragged through scandal? Being called a manipulative fraud who seduced the Duke under false pretenses? Watching society turn you into a cautionary tale about women who overreach their station? She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. As long as you know the truth, I don't care what they say. You will, eventually. When it becomes relentless and cruel and everywhere you go, whispers follow.
Then I'll learn to live with it. The same way you learned to live with being called the Dragon Duke.
The same way you survived your father's cruelty and your mother's death and decades of building yourself into a weapon. His expression softened slightly. You're stronger than I expected. You're more human than you pretend to be. They lay in silence, the weight of what they'd triggered settling over them. Finally, Crispin spoke again. There's something you need to understand about what happens next. Once Parliament convenes next week, my enemies will make their move. They'll question my fitness to hold my seat. They'll demand investigation into our marriage. They'll try to prove fraud or coercion or some justification for annulment. Let them try. They have resources, legal precedents, political alliances. This won't be like destroying Oswald. This will be coordinated assault by people who've spent decades perfecting the art of aristocratic destruction. Susanna sat up, pulling the sheet around herself. Then stop trying to protect me from reality and start telling me how we fight back. Something flickered in his expression, pride mixed with concern. You fight by becoming exactly what they fear most. A duchess who understands power as well as I do, who can navigate social warfare with the same precision I use in Parliament. Who makes them question whether destroying you is worth the cost? And you? I burn everything they value until they remember why crossing the Dragon Duke is suicide. How? He pulled her back down beside him, his voice dropping to dangerous quiet. I have files on every member of Parliament, every scandal, every financial crime, every secret they've buried. I've spent 15 years collecting leverage because I knew eventually someone would try to use my emotions against me. You've been planning for this. I've been planning for this since the day I inherited the title and realized the only way to survive aristocracy is to make yourself too dangerous to attack. His hand cupped her face. But here's what I didn't plan for. I didn't plan on actually caring what happens to you, on wanting to protect you from consequences instead of just using you as strategic advantage, on being willing to burn my own legacy to keep you safe. That's not weakness. That's being human. In aristocracy, they're the same thing. Then we'll redefine what power means. Show them that emotional connection doesn't make you vulnerable. It makes you absolutely ruthless because now you're fighting for something worth protecting. Outside, dawn was breaking over Thornwood Park. Light filtered through windows, illuminating the room where England's most dangerous duke lay with the woman who'd somehow become more valuable than his bloodline. Crispin pulled her closer, his voice rough. Whatever happens next, whatever they throw at us, I need you to promise me something. What? Don't sacrifice yourself trying to protect me. Don't confess to fraud or deception or anything else they claim. Don't give them ammunition because you think it'll spare me consequences. Why would I do that? Because you're falling in love with me. And people in love do stupid, self-destructive things trying to protect the person they care about. Susanna was quiet for a moment. Then promise me the same thing. Don't destroy yourself trying to defend me. Don't burn political alliances or sacrifice your position because they're attacking your wife. Don't make yourself vulnerable trying to prove loving me wasn't a mistake. He laughed quietly. We're both doomed, aren't we? Probably. But at least we'll be doomed together. They fell asleep as sunrise painted Thornwood Park in gold and crimson, two people who'd started as a calculated transaction and become something infinitely more dangerous. A partnership built on mutual respect, strategic brilliance, and the stubborn refusal to let aristocratic cruelty win. But in London, plans were already forming. Political enemies were gathering evidence. Social rivals were sharpening their weapons. And somewhere in the darkness, men who'd spent years fearing the Dragon Duke were preparing to prove that even dragons could be slain if you aimed for the heart. The war for Thornwood's legacy was just beginning, and Susanna Mercer, Duchess of Thornwood, was about to discover that being loved by England's most dangerous man meant becoming a target for everyone who'd ever wanted to see him fall. Parliament convened on a morning so cold that frost turned London's cobblestones into sheets of ice. Crispin left Thornwood Park before dawn, his carriage disappearing into fog, while Susanna stood at the window watching him vanish into the battlefield he'd been preparing for his entire life. She didn't sleep after he left. Couldn't. The weight of what was coming pressed against her chest like iron. By noon, messengers began arriving with updates. The first wave brought news that Lord Chancellor Pemberton had formally requested investigation into the Thornwood marriage contract. The second wave confirmed that 17 members of Parliament had signed the petition supporting the inquiry. The third wave delivered something far worse. Mrs. Holloway found Susanna in the library, her face pale. "Your Grace? There's a woman at the service entrance. She's demanding to speak with you. Says it's about His Grace and it cannot wait." "Who is she?" "She won't give her name. But she's clearly quality. Expensive clothing, education in her speech. And she's terrified." Susanna followed the housekeeper through corridors to a small receiving room where visitors of uncertain status were held. The woman waiting there was perhaps 30, beautiful in the way wealthy women are beautiful when they have unlimited resources for maintenance. But her eyes were raw from crying and her hands trembled when she stood. "Duchess Thornwood. Thank God. I wasn't sure you'd see me. Who are you?" The woman's composure cracked completely. "My name is Victoria Ashford. I was the Duke's mistress for 3 years before your marriage." The words landed like physical blows. Susanna forced her expression to remain neutral, even as her world tilted sideways. "I see. And you're here because he's going to be destroyed, and I can't let that happen without warning you about what's really at stake. Sit down. Talk quickly." Victoria collapsed into the chair, her words spilling out in desperate rushes. "Crispin and I met 5 years ago at a parliamentary gathering. He was investigating my husband for corruption. Found evidence that Lord Ashford had been embezzling from Crown funds for over a decade. The Duke offered me a choice. Help him gather additional evidence in exchange for protection when my husband was arrested, or watch myself go down as an accomplice. You chose cooperation. I chose survival. And somewhere in the process of destroying my husband, the Duke and I became involved. It lasted 3 years. He was never cruel, never dishonest about what we were, but he made it clear from the beginning that marriage was impossible, that his position required certain appearances and a mistress couldn't provide them." Victoria's hands twisted together. "Then he met you, and everything changed. He ended our arrangement within days of your first conversation. Paid me a settlement generous enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. Made sure I was protected from any scandal. He was thorough, efficient, completely emotionless about the whole thing." Susanna's throat tightened, but her voice remained steady. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because 3 days ago, a man approached me. Parliamentary investigator named Harrison. He had evidence of my relationship with the Duke, dates, locations, financial records proving the settlement. He wanted me to testify that Crispin only married you to cover up the fact that I'd gotten pregnant and lost the child. That the whole marriage was fraud designed to hide his inability to keep a mistress from becoming a scandal. And I told him to go to hell. But then he showed me something else. Something I didn't know existed." She pulled documents from her bag with shaking hands. "These are letters, written by the Duke to various political allies over the past year. In them, he discusses his need to marry strategically, to find a woman who could provide political advantage without emotional complications, who could be controlled and managed like any other asset." Susanna took the letters, her heart hammering. The handwriting was definitely Crispin's, the phrasing cold and calculating in ways that matched exactly how he spoke about strategy and power. The most damning letter was dated 2 weeks before their first meeting. "I require a wife who understands her position, exists for utility rather than affection. Someone desperate enough to accept terms that benefit my agenda without demanding reciprocity. Widows are ideal, already broken by loss and therefore malleable to guidance." The words cut like razors. Victoria watched her read, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know if those letters are real or forgeries, but Harrison has them. and he's planning to present them to Parliament as evidence that you were deliberately targeted. That the Duke investigated your vulnerability and exploited it. That everything between you has been manipulation from the beginning. Why bring this to me instead of him? Because, despite everything, I know Crispin Mercer is not a monster. He destroyed my husband because Lord Ashford was genuinely corrupt. He protected me when he could have left me to scandal. And when he ended our arrangement, he did it with more dignity than most men show their wives. Victoria stood, her composure barely holding. I don't know what's real anymore, but I know that if those letters are presented without context, they'll destroy both of you. And I owed him enough to give you warning. She left before Susanna could respond. The library felt suddenly suffocating. Susanna stared at the letters spread across the desk, reading them again and again, searching for evidence of forgery and finding none. Every detail matched. The paper was identical to what Crispin used for political correspondence. The wax seal bore the Thornwood crest. Even the specific phrasing about strategy and control sounded exactly like conversations they'd had. But the content was poison. If these were real, everything he'd told her was lies. The rescue wasn't kindness, it was calculation. The protection wasn't care, it was asset management. The confession about knowing her infertility wasn't love, it was manipulation designed to make her loyal. If these were real, she was exactly what the letters described. Desperate, malleable, deliberately targeted because her vulnerability made her useful. The study door opened behind her. Susanna spun to find Crispin standing in the entrance, still wearing his parliamentary coat, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. I got your message. What's happened? She held up the letters without speaking. He crossed the room in 3 strides, taking them from her hands and reading with increasing tension. Where did you get these? Victoria Ashford brought them. She said parliamentary investigators have copies and plan to present them as evidence that you deliberately manipulated me into marriage for political advantage. Crispin's jaw tightened as he read, his expression going absolutely cold. These are forgeries. Sophisticated ones, but forgeries nonetheless. How can you tell? Because I never wrote them. The handwriting is close but not exact. The seal is a duplicate made from wax impressions. And the content is designed specifically to confirm every suspicion Parliament already has about our marriage. But they sound exactly like you. The phrasing, the strategy, the clinical approach to relationships. He looked up sharply. You believe I wrote these? It wasn't a question. Susanna wanted to deny it, wanted to insist she trusted him completely. But the doubt was already there, poisonous and growing. I don't know what to believe. You admitted you investigated me before proposing. You admitted the marriage was strategic. These letters simply say out loud what you've already confessed. The difference is intent. I investigated you to understand whether you were victim or accomplice in Oswald's crimes. I married you strategically because that's how aristocratic marriages function. But I never targeted you as manipulable prey. Then why do these letters sound so believable? His expression shifted into something raw and angry. Because I spent 15 years building a reputation as a man who values strategy over emotion. Because I trained myself to speak about relationships in clinical terms so no one would suspect I was capable of actual feeling. Because I made myself into exactly the kind of calculating bastard these letters describe. He threw the documents onto the desk. But that doesn't mean I did this to you. It means someone who knows me well enough created forgeries designed to destroy us both by confirming your worst fears about my motivations. Who would do that? Someone with access to my private correspondence. Someone who understands how I think and speak. Someone close enough to replicate my handwriting and seal with precision. The implications hit like falling ice. Someone inside Thornwood Park. Crispin's silence was confirmation. Susanna's mind raced through possibilities. The household staff had been with the Thornwood family for generations. Mrs. Holloway was utterly loyal. The groundskeeper had served Crispin's father. Her thoughts stopped cold. Richard Mallory, your private secretary. He handles all your correspondence, has access to your seal, knows your writing style intimately. Crispin's expression went absolutely still. Richard has been with me for 8 years. He's managed everything from parliamentary strategy to personal finances. If he's been feeding information to investigators, he's had access to destroy me 1,000 times over. Unless he was waiting for the right moment. The moment when you were most vulnerable because you'd publicly admitted loving your wife. The study felt suddenly dangerous. Crispin moved to his desk, pulling out a locked drawer and extracting files Susanna had never seen. He spread them across the surface with controlled fury. 3 months ago, I noticed small discrepancies in household accounts. Nothing major. A few pounds here and there that could be explained as clerical errors. I had Richard investigate. And he reported finding nothing. Said the discrepancies were timing issues with bank transfers. But you didn't believe him. I didn't know what to believe. Richard has always been meticulous. Perfect loyalty. Perfect efficiency. No reason to suspect betrayal. Until now. Crispin's hand slammed against the desk hard enough to rattle inkwells. If Richard has been working against me, he knows everything. Every strategy. Every vulnerability. Every secret I've collected on parliamentary enemies. He could have been feeding information for months while I trusted him completely. The door to the study burst open. Mrs. Holloway stood in the entrance, her composure shattered. Your Grace, Mr. Mallory is gone. His rooms are empty, all his personal effects removed, and the safe in your London office has been opened. The files are missing. What files? All of them. Every piece of blackmail material, every financial record on parliamentary corruption, every witness statement you've collected over 15 years, everything you plan to use to defend yourself. Silence crashed through the study like a physical force. Susanna watched her husband's face transform, not into rage, into something far more terrifying, the absolute stillness of a predator realizing it had been outmaneuvered. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and deadly. How long has he been gone? Since early this morning. He left before you departed for Parliament. Told the staff he was running errands for your London office. Crispin's laugh was sharp and broken. He waited until I was in front of Parliament, until I was exposed and vulnerable. Then he took everything I needed to fight back and vanished. Can you rebuild the evidence? Not in time. The parliamentary hearing is scheduled for 3 days from now. Without those files, I have no leverage. No way to prove my accusations against Pemberton and the others. No defense except my word against forged letters designed to prove I'm a manipulative predator. What about witnesses? People who can confirm your character? Who? The political allies I've spent years controlling through blackmail? The rivals I've destroyed? The aristocrats who fear me too much to risk association? He turned to face Susanna directly. The only person who can testify to my character is you, and your testimony will be dismissed as the desperate defense of a wife who is either complicit in fraud or too naive to recognize manipulation. So we're finished. The words tasted like ash. Crispin moved to the window, staring out at Thornwood Park's grounds with the expression of a man watching his kingdom burn. Not finished, just exposed. Richard has given Parliament everything they need to destroy me. The forged letters prove premeditated manipulation. The missing files mean I cannot defend myself with evidence, and my own reputation makes it believable that I'm exactly the monster those letters describe. Why would Richard do this? After 8 years of loyal service? Money, power, revenge for some perceived slight. Does it matter? The result is the same. I'm about to be destroyed by someone I trusted completely, and everyone will believe I deserved it because dragons are supposed to be slain by clever heroes. Susanna crossed to him, refusing to let despair win. Then we fight differently. Without the files. Without leverage. We go to Parliament and tell the truth. What truth? That I married you knowing you were infertile? That I investigated your background before proposing? That I've spent 15 years collecting blackmail on political enemies? All of it. Every ugly, strategic, calculated decision. And then we explain why. He looked at her like she'd lost her mind. They'll crucify us. They're going to crucify us anyway. At least this way, we control the narrative. We admit to everything they're accusing us of and dare them to prove our motivations were malicious instead of protective. You want me to confess to being exactly what those forged letters claim? No. I want you to confess to being human, to making strategic decisions because that's how you were raised to survive, to investigating me because you'd watched too many women destroyed by predators, to collecting leverage on corrupt politicians because Parliament is corrupt and someone needed to fight back. And they'll still destroy me. Us, probably. But at least we'll go down honest instead of hiding behind lies that can be proven false. Crispin turned from the window, his expression raw. You realize what you are suggesting. If we admit to everything, if we lay ourselves bare in front of Parliament, we lose all protection, all leverage, all power to defend ourselves. We've already lost it. Richard took the leverage. The forged letters destroyed our protection. All we have left is honesty, and the hope that somewhere in Parliament, someone values integrity over aristocratic games. He studied her face like he was seeing her for the first time. You're asking me to trust that truth will win against coordinated political destruction. That confession will be received as courage instead of confirmation of guilt. That love will matter more than legacy. I'm asking you to fight like a man who has nothing left to lose instead of a dragon trying to protect a reputation that's already burning. The silence between them stretched impossibly long. Then Crispin did something Susanna had never seen. He pulled her against him, his arms wrapping around her with desperate intensity, his face buried against her hair. I don't know how to fight this way. I've spent my entire life building walls and collecting weapons. I don't know how to stand defenseless and hope it's enough. Then we learn together, because I'm not running, I'm not hiding, and I'm not letting you face this alone, even if it destroys us both, especially if it destroys us both, because at least we'll be destroyed together instead of separately by lies. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, and what she saw there broke her heart and rebuilt it simultaneously. Fear. Raw, undisguised fear from a man who'd spent decades making himself invulnerable. And beneath the fear, something infinitely more powerful. Trust. 3 days. That's how long they had to prepare for parliamentary annihilation. Crispin spent the time drafting a confession that would either save them or guarantee their destruction. Every strategic decision laid bare, every calculated move explained, every manipulation acknowledged and contextualized. Susanna spent the time gathering what little evidence remained: letters from tenants praising the Duke's fair treatment, testimony from widows he'd protected, records showing Thornwood Park's charitable donations and reforms under his management. It wasn't leverage. It was character witness from people with no political power. It would have to be enough. The night before the hearing, they sat together in the library surrounded by documents and half-written speeches and the crushing weight of impending judgment. Crispin broke the silence first. If this goes badly, if Parliament votes to strip my title and annul our marriage, I want you to know something. Susanna looked up from the tenant letters she was organizing. What? Marrying you was the first truly selfish thing I ever did. Not strategic, not calculated, selfish. Because I wanted you. Wanted someone who looked at me and saw a person instead of a weapon, or a monster, or a political asset. His voice roughened. Everything else I told you was true. The investigation, the strategy, the need for an heir. But underneath all of it was the simple, terrifying fact that I wanted you in ways I'd never allowed myself to want anything. Then why not just say that from the beginning? Because I didn't know how. I'd spent so long speaking in strategy and control that I'd forgotten how to admit to actual human desire. And by the time I realized what was happening, we were already married, and you were looking at me like I might actually be worth loving. You are worth loving, even if you're terrible at admitting it. He smiled, exhausted and genuine. We're both terrible at this. Two people raised in different types of survival trying to figure out how to actually live instead of just endure. Tomorrow, they'll try to prove we were never real, that this marriage was fraud. Let them try. They can annul the legal contract, but they can't unmake what we've become. And what have we become? Partners. Allies. Two people who chose each other despite every strategic reason not to. Crispin pulled her into his lap, holding her with the intensity of a man memorizing the moment. If tomorrow destroys everything, if they strip my title and scatter us to different corners of England, promise me one thing. What? Don't let them make you believe this wasn't real. Don't let their judgment erase what we built. I promise. If you promise the same thing, deal. They made love that night with desperate intensity, knowing morning might bring separation they couldn't prevent. And when dawn finally came, they dressed for battle in silence. Susanna wore deep blue silk that made her look every inch a duchess. Crispin wore his parliamentary robes with military precision. They looked like aristocratic power. They felt like condemned prisoners walking toward execution. The carriage ride to Parliament was silent. London's streets blurred past while Susanna tried to memorize every detail of this moment. The way Crispin's jaw tightened when he was controlling fear. The way his hand found hers without looking. The way they'd become fluent in each other's silence. Parliament loomed ahead, its Gothic architecture imposing against gray sky. Inside, 300 members waited to decide their fate. Crispin squeezed her hand once before they separated. She would sit in the gallery with other aristocratic wives while he stood before Parliament to defend himself against accusations of fraud, manipulation, and dishonor. The hearing began with Lord Chancellor Pemberton reading the charges, each one designed to destroy, each one supported by evidence that looked damning without context. Then came the witnesses. Victoria Ashford testified first, her voice steady as she confirmed their affair and the settlement. She refused to speculate about his motivations for marriage, but the damage was already done. Next came Richard Mallory himself. Susanna's hands clenched as the Duke's former secretary walked to the witness stand with the confidence of a man who'd already won. He looked every inch the loyal servant betrayed by an unworthy master. Pemberton's questions were surgical. Mr. Mallory, you served as the Duke of Thornwood's private secretary for 8 years. Did you ever witness him discuss marriage as a strategic transaction? Many times. His Grace frequently spoke about the need to marry for political advantage rather than affection. Did he ever specifically mention targeting vulnerable widows? Richard's pause was perfectly calculated hesitation. Yes. Approximately 6 months before his marriage, he instructed me to compile a list of recently widowed women from respectable families who might be desperate enough to accept unusual terms. And did Mrs. Fairfax appear on that list? She did. Gasps rippled through Parliament. Crispin's expression remained neutral, but Susanna saw the fury burning beneath his control. Pemberton continued, Did the Duke ever express affection for his wife? Not in my presence. He spoke of her primarily as a successful acquisition, someone who would manage the household competently while requiring minimal emotional investment. More gasps, more whispers. Then Pemberton produced the forged letters, entering them as evidence while Richard confirmed they matched the Duke's handwriting and seal. The case was building into an avalanche of condemnation. Finally, it was Crispin's turn to respond. He stood before Parliament with the bearing of a man who'd commanded rooms his entire adult life. But there was something different now, something vulnerable beneath the control. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the chamber. Everything you've heard today is partially true. I did investigate my wife before proposing marriage. I did compile lists of potential strategic matches. I did speak about marriage in clinical terms because that's how I was raised to view aristocratic unions. The chamber went absolutely silent. But what those facts don't include is context, intent, the difference between strategic thinking and malicious manipulation. He pulled out his own documents. I investigated Susanna Fairfax because her brother-in-law, Sir Oswald Breck, was hunting her, because I'd watched too many women destroyed by predators like him, and I'd reached a point where tolerating it was no longer acceptable. Pemberton interrupted. So you admit you targeted her because she was vulnerable. I admit I noticed she was in danger. There's a difference between targeting prey and recognizing someone who needs protection but lacks the resources to secure it themselves. A convenient distinction. Is it? Because if noticing vulnerability and offering assistance is manipulation, then every charitable act in history is fraud. Every alliance formed during crisis is exploitation. Every relationship that begins from need instead of luxury is illegitimate. His voice hardened. I married Susanna Fairfax knowing she could not give me an heir. That information was in the medical records my investigator compiled. I married her anyway because the heir was never the point. The point was removing her from Oswald's reach while simultaneously destroying a predator who'd spent years tormenting vulnerable women. But you never told her you knew about her infertility, because she was terrified I would reject her if I knew, because she'd spent years being told her value as a woman depended on her ability to produce children, because confessing my knowledge would have felt like another man using her medical condition to control her. Crispin's expression went raw. So yes, I kept that secret. I let her believe I didn't know. And when she finally confessed, I told her the truth, that I'd known from the beginning and married her anyway. Why? Because I wanted her. Not her womb, not her bloodline, not her strategic value. Her. The woman who climbed into my carriage looking like drowned fury and refused to beg for mercy. The woman who managed my household better than anyone had in decades. The woman who looked at the Dragon Duke and saw a person instead of a monster. The chamber was absolutely silent. Pemberton recovered first. Beautiful words. But they don't change the facts. You manipulated a desperate woman into marriage for your own purposes. No. I offered a desperate woman options she didn't have. Protection. Resources. Security. in exchange for managing my household and tolerating my reputation. That's not manipulation, that's negotiation between two adults who understood the terms. And when you fell in love with her, was that part of the negotiation? Crispin's smile was sharp as broken glass. Love was never part of the plan. Love was the complication that made me vulnerable, that gave you ammunition to destroy me, that turned strategic advantage into genuine weakness. He looked directly at Pemberton, which is exactly what you've been waiting for. The moment when the Dragon Duke cared about something more than power. When I could be hurt through emotional attachment instead of political maneuvering. Pemberton's expression flickered. You're deflecting. This hearing is about fraud, not philosophy. No. This hearing is about whether aristocratic marriages can ever be legitimate when they're built on strategy instead of romance. Whether women who marry for protection deserve to be called frauds. Whether men who marry for heirs but get love instead deserve to be destroyed for it. Crispin pulled out the final document. This is a signed statement from my wife. She confirms every fact you've presented. The investigation, the strategic proposal, the infertility, all of it. And she confirms that despite knowing all of this, despite understanding exactly what kind of transaction our marriage began as, she chose to stay. He looked up at the gallery where Susanna sat surrounded by aristocratic wives watching her with calculating interest. Because our marriage started as strategy doesn't mean it remained that way. Because I investigated her doesn't erase the fact that I came to respect her. And because she was desperate doesn't mean she was helpless or stupid or manipulated. His voice dropped to something raw and absolute. You want to annul this marriage? Strip my title? Prove that love born from strategy is somehow less legitimate than love born from ballroom dances and pretty lies? Do it, but understand that you're not protecting aristocratic integrity. You're punishing two people who had the audacity to be honest about what marriage actually is in our world. A negotiation, a strategy, a transaction that sometimes, if you're extremely fortunate, becomes something more. The chamber erupted into chaos. Some members shouted agreement, others demanded immediate annulment. Pemberton called for order while Crispin stood at the center of the storm, absolutely still. Then a voice cut through the noise. Enough. Every head turned toward the speaker's platform where Duke Harrison of Westmont stood. He was 70, legendary for his political acumen, and utterly neutral in aristocratic conflicts. I've listened to this circus long enough. Lord Pemberton wants us to believe the Duke of Thornwood manipulated his wife into fraudulent marriage. But I see no evidence of fraud. I see strategic thinking. I see two people navigating desperate circumstances in ways that benefited them both. Pemberton tried to interrupt, but Harrison's glare silenced him. This chamber is full of men who married for political alliance, who investigated their wives' families before proposing, who negotiated terms like business contracts. Are we frauds too? Or is the Duke's only crime admitting openly what the rest of us whisper in private? The tide was shifting. Harrison continued. Furthermore, the evidence against the Duke relies heavily on testimony from a dismissed secretary with obvious motivation for revenge, and letters that conveniently appeared only after that secretary disappeared with files that could have proven the Duke's accusations against Lord Pemberton and others. He looked directly at Pemberton. Unless someone can provide actual evidence of harm to the Duchess, unless she herself testifies to manipulation or coercion, I see no grounds for annulment. All eyes turned to Susanna. Pemberton's smile was cold. Very well, let's hear from the Duchess herself, under oath. Does she claim to have been manipulated into this marriage? The chamber went silent as Susanna stood in the gallery. She was given 3 minutes to respond. 3 minutes to either save them or confirm their destruction. She walked to the witness stand with her heart hammering, every eye in Parliament fixed on her like predators assessing prey. The oath was administered. Then Pemberton asked the question designed to end them. Duchess Thornwood, did your husband manipulate you into marriage? Susanna looked at Crispin standing alone before Parliament, stripped of leverage and protection, vulnerable in ways he'd spent his entire life avoiding. Then she looked at Pemberton and every aristocrat who'd spent the morning trying to destroy them, and she told the truth. No, he rescued me. The word landed in Parliament like thunder-splitting stone. Rescued, not manipulated, not coerced, not deceived, rescued. Pemberton's confidence fractured visibly. Rescued from what precisely? From my brother-in-law who was systematically destroying my reputation and livelihood. From a society that views widows as either burdens or prey. From men like you who mistake legal procedure for morality and use it to destroy people who threaten your comfortable corruption. Susanna's voice carried through the chamber with absolute clarity. The Duke investigated me because Sir Oswald Breck was hunting me. He offered marriage because I had no other options that didn't end in destitution, or worse. He knew about my infertility because, unlike most aristocratic men, he actually bothered to gather facts before making decisions that would affect another person's life. She looked directly at Pemberton. You want to know if I was manipulated? Ask yourself this. What's more manipulative, a man who researches a woman's circumstances and offers her genuine protection with clearly stated terms, or a society that raises women to believe their only value lies in producing heirs and then destroys them when their bodies refuse to cooperate? The chamber erupted. Half the members were shouting agreement, the other half demanding she be removed for contempt. Pemberton slammed his gavel repeatedly. Order! The Duchess will confine herself to answering questions, not delivering political manifestos. Then ask better questions. Because so far, you've asked me to confirm that my husband made strategic decisions, that he investigated before proposing, that he married me knowing I couldn't give him an heir. Yes to all of it, and I would make the exact same choice again. Why? Because he offered me something no other man in England would have. Honest terms, real protection, and the dignity of being treated like an adult capable of making informed decisions about my own life, rather than a child who needs to be shielded from reality. But you admit he didn't love you when he proposed. Susanna's smile was sharp as broken glass. Of course he didn't love me. We'd met once. Love isn't formed in carriages during rainstorms. It's built through months of conversation and shared challenges, and discovering that the person you married for strategy is actually worth loving for themselves. She turned to face the entire chamber. Every marriage in this room began as transaction. Political alliance, financial merger, social advancement. The only difference between the Duke and the rest of you is that he was honest about it. He didn't pretend our marriage was romance when it was survival. And when it became something more, he didn't hide behind aristocratic pretense. He admitted it publicly, even though he knew it would make him vulnerable. Her voice hardened. So yes, Lord Pemberton, my husband rescued me. And then he did something even more remarkable. He let me rescue him back. From loneliness, from becoming the exact kind of monster his father was, from believing that power and control were the only things worth protecting. The silence in Parliament was absolute. Duke Harrison stood again, his voice carrying authority that even Pemberton couldn't dismiss. I've heard enough. The Duchess confirms she entered this marriage willingly with full knowledge of the terms. She confirms no coercion or deception beyond the normal strategic considerations that govern all aristocratic marriages. I see no grounds for annulment. Pemberton's face went white with rage. The forged letters were forgeries created by a dismissed secretary with obvious motivation for revenge. Unless you can prove the Duke actually wrote them, they're worthless as evidence. We have testimony from Mr. Mallory, who conveniently disappeared with the Duke's files immediately before this hearing, who had access to seals and writing samples needed to create convincing forgeries, who stands to gain considerably if the Duke is destroyed. Harrison's gaze swept the chamber. I move that this investigation be dismissed for lack of credible evidence, and I further move that parliamentary investigation be opened into Lord Pemberton's conduct in bringing these charges. The timing is too convenient, the evidence too perfectly designed to confirm predetermined conclusions. The vote happened quickly. Not unanimous, but overwhelming enough to crush Pemberton's ambitions. The investigation was dismissed. The marriage stood. Crispin Mercer remained Duke of Thornwood, but the cost was written in every face surrounding them. Half of Parliament now viewed them as dangerous radicals who'd exposed uncomfortable truths about aristocratic marriage. The other half saw them as survivors who'd outmaneuvered attempted destruction. Neither side would forget. Neither side would forgive. The carriage ride back to Thornwood Park happened in stunned silence. Susanna sat across from Crispin, watching emotions cycle through his expression too quickly to name. Relief, exhaustion, fury. Something that looked dangerously close to tears he would never allow to fall. When they finally reached the estate, he climbed out without waiting for footmen and walked directly into the manor. Not to the library, not to his study. Straight upstairs to their private rooms. Susanna followed, dismissing Mrs. Holloway's concerned questions with a gesture. She found Crispin standing at the window overlooking Thornwood Park's endless grounds, His hands braced against the frame like a man trying to hold himself upright through sheer will. We won. Her voice was quiet in the enormous room. He didn't turn around. We survived. That's not the same as winning. What do you mean? I mean, half of Parliament now views me as emotionally compromised. The other half sees me as a man who admitted to calculated manipulation and got away with it because my wife defended me. Either way, I've lost the one thing that made me untouchable. What? The perception that I'm invulnerable, that emotions don't factor into my decisions, that the Dragon Duke operates purely on strategy and control. He turned to face her, and the rawness in his expression was devastating. I stood in front of 300 men and admitted that I love you more than my legacy, that I would sacrifice my bloodline rather than lose you. Do you understand what that means in aristocratic politics? It means you're human. It means I'm weak. And weakness in our world is blood in water. Every ambitious rival will now probe for emotional vulnerabilities. Every enemy will target you to wound me. Every political decision I make will be questioned as potentially compromised by personal attachment. Then we make them regret it. Show them that loving me didn't make you weak. It made you absolutely terrifying. He laughed, sharp and broken. How? By what mechanism do we convince Parliament that emotional vulnerability is actually strength? By being better at this than they are. By making decisions so strategically brilliant that they can't question your judgment. By protecting each other so effectively that anyone who tries to exploit our connection gets destroyed in the attempt. You're talking about years of careful rebuilding, of proving ourselves over and over while our enemies wait for us to make one mistake. Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Because the alternative is living in fear, hiding our relationship, pretending we don't care about each other to protect some fantasy of invulnerability that already shattered the moment you admitted the truth. Crispin crossed to her, his hands cupping her face with desperate intensity. I don't know how to do this. How to be powerful and vulnerable simultaneously. How to rule an estate while protecting the one thing that makes me genuinely weak. Then we figure it out together, like we figured out everything else. She pulled him closer. You spent 15 years building yourself into a weapon because you watched your mother destroyed by a powerful man who viewed compassion as weakness. You became the Dragon Duke to make sure no one could ever hurt you the way your father hurt her. His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. But somewhere in that process, you forgot something crucial. Your mother wasn't destroyed because she was weak. She was destroyed because she was alone. Because she had no one protecting her the way she tried to protect others. Because your father viewed her as property instead of partner. Susanna held his gaze. You're not alone anymore. I'm not your property. And anyone who tries to destroy you through me is going to discover that I learned from the Dragon Duke himself. I know how to gather leverage, how to identify enemies, how to destroy threats before they fully form. You shouldn't have to, maybe not, but I want to. Because protecting you isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing I've ever done. The kiss that followed was desperate and claiming and filled with the relief of people who'd survived execution by collective judgment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Crispin managed one question. What do we do now? Now we show Parliament what happens when two strategically brilliant people stop hiding their partnership and start using it as a weapon. 3 days later, the first move came from an unexpected direction. Catherine Blackwood arrived at Thornwood Park with 4 other widows whose names carried significant weight in London society. They were shown into the formal drawing room where Susanna received them with the bearing of a woman who'd just survived parliamentary annihilation. Blackwood didn't waste time on pleasantries. Your testimony created shockwaves. Half of London society is calling you a radical. The other half is calling you dangerously honest. Both sides are terrified. Good. One of the other women, Lady Pembroke, leaned forward. We represent a network of women who've spent decades navigating aristocratic politics while our husbands and brothers and fathers made decisions that affected our lives without consulting us. We've watched women destroyed for failing to produce heirs, for aging, for showing intelligence, for daring to have opinions. Susanna waited, sensing this conversation was heading somewhere significant. Blackwood continued, Your defense of the Duke changed something. You stood in Parliament and said out loud what we've all thought privately, that aristocratic marriage is transaction, that women are traded like assets, that the entire system is designed to keep us powerless while pretending to protect us. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. Exactly. And truth spoken publicly is more dangerous than any amount of private rebellion. You've given us something we haven't had before, a duchess.
who's willing to name the system while operating within it, who understands power politics well enough to survive, but refuses to pretend the game is fair. What are you proposing? An alliance. We have information, connections, resources that don't appear in official records. We know which lords are embezzling, which ones abuse their wives, which ones are maintaining mistresses while demanding their wives remain chaste and faithful. We know where the bodies are buried because we're the ones who had to help bury them. And you want to share this information with us. We want to weaponize it. Use what we know to protect women who are where you were 3 months ago. Trapped, isolated, being systematically destroyed by men who believe power grants them unlimited cruelty. Blackwood's smile was sharp as broken glass. You and the Duke have proven that strategic marriage can survive public scrutiny. That honesty about terms doesn't invalidate the partnership. That women can defend their own choices even when society demands we play victim or conspirator. Help us build something that uses those lessons. A network that identifies vulnerable women before predators fully corner them. That offers real alternatives. Real protection, not charity, not rescue. Strategic partnership that benefits everyone involved. Susanna studied the women surrounding her, each one wealthy, connected, powerful in ways that didn't require public acknowledgement, each one carrying scars from navigating a system designed to break them. What does the Duke get from this arrangement? Information, loyalty, political support from families who currently view him with suspicion, and the knowledge that his wife is building her own power base instead of remaining dependent on his protection. Blackwood leaned forward. The Duke survived parliamentary attack because you defended him publicly. Imagine what you could accomplish with organized support from women across London's most powerful families. Imagine how quickly his enemies would retreat if attacking him meant facing coordinated social destruction from wives, daughters, and widows who actually talk to each other. You're proposing we turn aristocratic marriage into genuine partnership, that we force men to treat their wives as allies instead of property by making it strategically disadvantageous to do otherwise. Exactly. Susanna felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, not hesitation, recognition. This was what power actually looked like. Not individual dominance, collective strategy. I need to discuss this with my husband. Of course. But Duchess. The offer has a time limit. Every day we wait is another day predators like Oswald operate unopposed. Another widow cornered. Another daughter married off to a man who views her as breeding stock. How long? 1 week. After that, we move forward with or without Thornwood support. We'd prefer to have the Dragon Duke as ally rather than neutral party, but we will move forward regardless. After they left, Susanna found Crispin in his study, surrounded by the rebuilt files Richard Mallory had stolen. He'd spent 3 days reconstructing evidence from memory and secondary sources. His expression was exhausted and grim. She told him everything Blackwood proposed. He listened in silence, his face unreadable. When she finished, he set down his pen with careful precision. They're asking us to fundamentally alter how aristocratic power operates, to give women coordinated influence in political decisions that have traditionally been exclusively male domains. Yes, every lord in Parliament will view this as direct threat to their authority. Probably. It could destroy what little goodwill we rebuilt during the hearing. Could mark us as radicals trying to undermine social order. Almost certainly. He stood, moving to the window where he'd stood 3 days prior, admitting he didn't know how to be powerful and vulnerable simultaneously. Or it could be exactly what we need, a power base that doesn't rely on blackmail or fear or traditional political leverage. Something built on genuine alliance and mutual protection. Crispin turned to face her. Your mother was destroyed because she was alone. Mine was destroyed for the same reason. Every woman Oswald victimized was isolated. Every widow Catherine Blackwood wants to protect is operating without coordinated support. What are you saying? I'm saying yes. We build this alliance. We give it every resource Thornwood can provide. And we show Parliament that the Dragon Duke didn't become weak when he married you. He became infinitely more dangerous because now he's fighting alongside someone who understands power from a completely different angle. You realize this makes us targets. Permanent, ongoing targets. We were already targets. Might as well be dangerous ones. The alliance was formalized 2 days later in the Thornwood Park Library. 14 women representing London's most influential families. Each one bringing information, resources, and motivation. Crispin attended the first meeting at Susanna's insistence.
He stood at the head of the table and delivered a speech that would be quoted in drawing rooms for the next decade. For 15 years, I've operated under the belief that power requires isolation, that vulnerability invites destruction, that the only way to survive aristocracy is to make yourself untouchable through fear and control. His gaze swept the women surrounding him. I was wrong. Isolation doesn't create invulnerability. It creates single points of failure. One well-placed attack, one moment of exposed weakness, and everything collapses. But coordinated alliance, mutual protection, information sharing across families who would traditionally compete, that's not weakness. That's strategic brilliance our fathers and grandfathers were too arrogant to recognize. He looked at Susanna. My wife survived attempted destruction by speaking truth publicly, by refusing to play victim or conspirator, by standing in Parliament and naming the system while defending her choices within it. That's power our enemies don't know how to fight, because they've spent centuries controlling women by isolating them, by making them compete for male approval, by convincing them that survival requires submission. His voice hardened. You're proposing we shatter that system, that we build something that makes predators like Oswald extinct, that we create real consequences for men who view women as property to be controlled rather than partners to be respected. He smiled, and it was the Dragon Duke's smile, sharp and absolute and utterly terrifying. I'm offering Thornwood's complete support, financial resources, political leverage, every piece of information I've collected over 15 years, and the guarantee that any man who attempts to destroy one of you will answer to me personally. The alliance was sealed. Within weeks, the first results emerged. A widow being pressured into signing over her estate suddenly had legal representation funded by anonymous aristocratic patronage. A young woman being forced into marriage to a known abuser found herself invited to extended visit with family friends who happened to be alliance members. A lord attempting to embezzle from his deceased brother's widow discovered that 3 parliamentary votes he needed mysteriously disappeared. Small victories, surgical strikes. Nothing dramatic enough to trigger backlash, but effective enough to send clear message. Touching alliance members had consequences. Parliament noticed. Lord Pemberton attempted retaliation by spreading rumors that the Duke was building a secret political faction, that Thornwood Park had become headquarters for radical conspiracy. The rumors were partially true, but before Pemberton could leverage them effectively, his own secrets started surfacing. Financial irregularities from 10 years prior. Witness testimony about bribes paid to secure favorable legislation. Documents proving he'd embezzled Crown funds. The evidence appeared anonymously, but was absolutely devastating. Pemberton was forced to resign within a month. His replacement was Duke Harrison of Westmont, who defended Crispin during the parliamentary hearing. The message was clear. Attack the alliance, and coordinated destruction follows. 6 months passed. The network grew. 20 families, 30. Women from across England's aristocracy joining an organization that officially didn't exist but wielded increasing influence. Thornwood Park transformed from fortress into headquarters. Strategy meetings happened weekly. Information was compiled and weaponized. Vulnerable women were identified and offered genuine alternatives before predators could fully corner them. And at the center of it all, Crispin and Susanna Mercer proved that strategic partnership could be stronger than traditional power. But power always invites challenges. And the alliance's very success guaranteed that enemies would eventually coordinate significant response. The attack came during a winter storm that turned London into sheets of ice and freezing rain. Messengers arrived at Thornwood Park in waves, each one carrying worse news than the last. 7 alliance families had been targeted simultaneously. Legal challenges to estates, accusations of impropriety, financial irregularities. Each attack perfectly coordinated to strike when alliance leadership was scattered across England for holiday gatherings. Crispin read the reports with increasing tension, his jaw tightening with each new disaster. This is organized, too precise to be coincidence. Someone's been watching us, learning our patterns, identifying our vulnerabilities. Who has that kind of reach? He looked up from the documents, his expression grim. Someone with access to parliamentary records, legal precedents, financial documentation across multiple families. Someone who's been inside aristocratic power structures long enough to understand how we operate. His hands clenched. Someone like Richard Mallory. We haven't heard from him in months. I assumed he'd taken his payment and disappeared. That's what he wanted us to assume. While we were building the alliance, he was building a counter-strategy, gathering his own intelligence, preparing coordinated assault designed to shatter our network by attacking multiple points simultaneously. Can we defend against this? Crispin was already writing responses, his mind working with frightening speed. We can defend some of the families, probably most of them, but not all. 7 simultaneous legal challenges require resources we don't have, expertise that takes time to deploy, and the attacks are designed to force us into choosing which families to save and which to abandon. He looked up. That's the real goal. Not to destroy the alliance outright. To make us demonstrate that we can't actually protect everyone, that our promises of mutual defense are hollow when real pressure arrives. Then we don't choose. We protect all of them. That's impossible. Even with Thornwood's resources. We cannot fight 7 separate legal battles across England while maintaining the political pressure needed to keep Parliament from openly supporting the attacks. Crispin's expression was devastated. We have to prioritize, save who we can, accept losses where we must, and hope the alliance survives the proof that we're not invincible. No. Susanna's voice was absolute. We don't accept losses. We don't prioritize. We change the battlefield entirely. How? By doing what Richard doesn't expect. By making this public. By taking the coordinated attack and exposing it as exactly what it is. Organized conspiracy by men who are terrified of women having actual power. That risks everything. Once we go public, we can't walk it back. The alliance becomes visible target instead of invisible network. It's already a target. Richard proved that. The question is whether we fight from shadows while pretending we don't exist, or whether we fight openly and dare them to destroy us in full view of society. Crispin stared at her like he was seeing someone completely new. You're proposing we weaponize exposure, turn the alliance into public movement instead of secret network. Yes, because secret networks can be dismantled quietly, but public movements are much harder to destroy without looking like tyrants crushing legitimate organization. This could destroy us, both of us, the alliance, everything we've built. Or it could be exactly what we need, the moment we stop hiding and start demanding that society acknowledge what we've been doing all along, protecting women, providing alternatives, building power that doesn't require male approval. Outside, thunder crashed. Rain hammered against Thornwood Park's ancient windows. Inside, Crispin Mercer made the decision that would define the rest of his life. Do it. Make it public. And God help anyone who tries to stop us. The announcement was carefully orchestrated. Susanna drafted a statement that was published simultaneously in London's 3 largest newspapers. Not as scandal or gossip, as formal declaration of purpose. The Alliance for Aristocratic Reform exists to provide strategic partnership and genuine protection for women navigating social structures designed to keep them powerless. We offer legal assistance, financial resources, and coordinated support to widows, wives, and daughters who would otherwise face predatory treatment from men who believe power grants unlimited cruelty. We make no apologies for this work. We acknowledge that it challenges traditional power structures. We accept that it makes us targets for those who prefer women isolated and vulnerable. And we invite all women of quality and courage to join us in reshaping what aristocratic marriage and family alliance can become when partnership replaces property and mutual respect replaces submission. The statement was signed by 23 duchesses, countesses, and ladies representing England's most influential families. At the top of the list, Susanna Mercer, Duchess of Thornwood. Beside her name, Crispin Mercer, Duke of Thornwood. London society exploded. Conservative aristocrats called it radical insurgency. Progressive families called it long overdue reform. Parliament divided into factions supporting and opposing the alliance's public emergence. And in the center of the firestorm, Thornwood Park became fortress under siege. Not metaphorical siege, actual siege. 3 days after publication, crowds began gathering outside the estate gates. Some supporters, some protesters, all demanding the Duke and Duchess address them publicly. Crispin stood at the window watching hundreds of people fill Thornwood Park's grounds, his expression unreadable. This is what revolution looks like. Not sudden collapse. Slow pressure building until the old system can no longer contain it. Are we revolutionaries now? He laughed quietly. We're aristocrats who got tired of watching people destroyed by a system designed to protect predators. If that makes us revolutionaries, then aristocracy deserves to burn. Movement at the gates caught his attention. Armed men, dozens of them, wearing livery that marked them as belonging to parliamentary authority. At their head stood a face Susanna recognized with cold shock. Richard Mallory. The former secretary had returned, and he'd brought force sufficient to occupy Thornwood Park by legal authority. Crispin's expression went absolutely cold. He's calling our hand, forcing us to either submit to parliamentary investigation or resist and prove we're exactly the dangerous radicals our enemies claim. What do we do? He turned from the window, his face set with terrible resolve. We make them choose between law that protects predators and justice that protects people. Between tradition that crushes anyone who challenges it and progress that acknowledges human dignity. He crossed to his desk and pulled out documents he'd been preparing for exactly this moment. These are signed confessions from 47 aristocratic women detailing abuse, embezzlement, coercion, and crimes committed by their husbands, brothers, and fathers. Names, dates, evidence that would destroy half of Parliament if made public. Mutually assured destruction. No. Assured justice, because we're not threatening to release these unless they back down. We're releasing them regardless. We're making every crime public, every scandal visible, every bit of aristocratic corruption exposed to full daylight. His smile was absolutely terrifying. They can arrest us. They can occupy Thornwood Park. They can destroy the Alliance's physical presence. But they cannot stop the truth once it's public. Cannot prevent society from seeing exactly what we've been protecting women from. Cannot maintain the fiction that aristocratic power is noble and just when we've documented decades of systematic cruelty. You'll destroy yourself along with them. Those documents implicate families allied with Thornwood, political connections you've spent years building. Yes, that's exactly what I'll do, because some things are worth more than political survival. He pulled Susanna against him, his arms tight and desperate. I watched my mother die believing she was worthless because she valued compassion over power. I spent 15 years building myself into a weapon to make sure no one could hurt me the way my father hurt her. His voice broke slightly. But weapons don't build anything. They only destroy. And I'm tired of destroying. Tired of operating in shadows. Tired of watching good people crushed by a system I've helped maintain because challenging it seemed too dangerous. So we burn it down, all of it, and hope something better grows from the ashes. Outside, Richard Mallory was shouting demands through the gates. Inside, Crispin and Susanna stood together facing the choice that would define them. Submit and survive diminished, or fight and risk losing everything. Susanna looked at her husband, the Dragon Duke, the most feared aristocrat in England, the man who'd rescued her and then let her rescue him back. Then let's show them what happens when the dragon stops playing by their rules. Crispin kissed her once, hard and desperate, and filled with the certainty of people choosing principle over survival. Then he walked to the window and threw it open. His voice carried across Thornwood Park's grounds with absolute authority. Mr. Mallory, you've returned with parliamentary guards to arrest me for crimes I've openly admitted, for building an organization that challenges aristocratic power structures, for refusing to pretend that tradition justifies cruelty. The crowd went silent. Come and arrest me then. But understand that the moment you enter Thornwood Park, every document in my possession becomes public. Every aristocratic crime I've documented for 15 years. Every scandal your employers want buried. Everything. He pulled the confession files into view. You want to destroy the Alliance? You'll succeed. But the cost will be watching half of Parliament resign in disgrace. Watching the entire aristocratic system exposed as exactly what we've claimed. Watching society realize that the people you're arresting were the only ones trying to protect the vulnerable from systematic predation. Richard's face went white with rage. You're bluffing. You wouldn't destroy your own position. My position no longer matters. What matters is making sure that 20 years from now, women aren't still being destroyed by men who believe power grants unlimited cruelty. What matters is ensuring that my wife's courage in defending our partnership means something more than personal survival. Crispin's smile was absolutely terrifying. So come arrest me. Occupy my estate. Destroy everything I've built. And watch me burn aristocratic England to ash on my way down. The standoff stretched impossibly long. Armed guards at the gates, hundreds of witnesses watching, Richard Mallory facing the man who'd once been his employer and was now his most dangerous enemy. Then a carriage appeared through the crowd. Black. Expensive. bearing the royal seal. Every head turned. The carriage stopped at the gates and a man emerged, elderly, severe, wearing robes that marked him as speaking with crown authority. Lord Chief Justice Rothwell. His voice carried across the grounds with absolute finality. By order of Her Majesty, all parliamentary actions regarding the Duke and Duchess of Thornwood are suspended pending royal investigation. Mr. Mallory, you and your men will withdraw immediately. Richard's face collapsed. The Crown has no jurisdiction over parliamentary. The Crown has absolute jurisdiction when Parliament attempts to arrest a peer of the realm without royal consent, which you did not secure, which means this entire action is illegal. Rothwell's gaze swept the crowd. Furthermore, Her Majesty has reviewed the alliance for aristocratic reform's stated purposes and finds nothing treasonous or illegal in providing legal assistance and strategic partnership to women of quality. The alliance will continue its work unmolested by parliamentary interference. He looked directly at Crispin. However, the Duke and Duchess of Thornwood are hereby summoned to appear before Her Majesty in 3 days to answer questions about the alliance's methods and future intentions. It wasn't arrest, but it wasn't freedom either. It was the Queen herself demanding account, forcing them to defend their revolution to the one person in England whose authority superseded even Parliament. Crispin bowed with military precision. We will attend Her Majesty at her pleasure. Rothwell nodded once and returned to his carriage. Richard Mallory stood frozen as parliamentary guards withdrew. His coordinated attack shattered, his leverage destroyed. His only option retreat or face charges for a legal arrest attempt. He chose retreat, but his expression promised this wasn't over. The crowd dispersed slowly, some celebrating, some shocked, all understanding they'd witnessed something historic. Inside Thornwood Park, Crispin and Susanna stood together watching England's aristocratic world recalibrate around them. 3 days. That's how long they had to prepare a defense that would either legitimize their revolution or condemn them as dangerous radicals. 3 days to convince a queen that the system she ruled deserved to burn. 3 days before the final battle. Susanna took her husband's hand, feeling his pulse hammering against her palm. Are you afraid? Terrified. You? Absolutely. But also alive in ways I've never been. Because for the first time in my life, I'm fighting for something that matters more than survival. What's that? The future. For women who come after us. For daughters who won't have to choose between marriage and autonomy. For widows who won't be prey. For a world where partnership replaces property and love doesn't require surrendering dignity. Crispin pulled her close, his voice rough with emotion. Win or lose, we've already changed something. We've proven that aristocratic power can be challenged. That coordinated alliance is stronger than isolated dominance. That love and strategy aren't opposites. His hand cupped her face. Whatever happens in 3 days, I want you to know something. What? You were worth it. All of it. The political risk. The parliamentary attack. The revolution. You were worth becoming vulnerable. Worth admitting I'm human. Worth burning my reputation to prove that partnership matters more than legacy. She kissed him with desperate intensity, both of them knowing that 3 days from now, everything might be over. But right now, in this moment, they were together. United. Two people who'd started as transaction and become something infinitely more dangerous. A genuine partnership in a world designed to prevent exactly that. Outside, London was changing. Inside, revolution was being planned. And in 3 days, the Dragon Duke and his Duchess would stand before England's Queen and fight for the right to reshape aristocratic power itself. The climax was coming, and neither of them was backing down. The royal summons arrived the next morning on cream parchment bearing the Queen's personal seal. 3 simple lines that carried the weight of absolute authority. The Duke and Duchess of Thornwood will present themselves at Buckingham Palace on the morning of January 12th to answer questions regarding the Alliance for Aristocratic Reform and its impact on social stability. Her Majesty expects complete honesty. Failure to attend will be viewed as contempt of the crown. Crispin read it once and set it on his desk with hands that were perfectly steady despite the implications. Susanna watched him from the doorway, recognizing the controlled stillness that meant his mind was working through scenarios at frightening speed. She's not calling us to congratulate our reform efforts. No, she's calling us to determine whether we're dangerous revolutionaries or necessary evolution. Whether the alliance strengthens England's aristocracy or threatens to tear it apart. And if she decides we're the former, then everything we've built ends. The alliance is disbanded, We're stripped of title and influence, and every woman we've protected is left vulnerable to the same predators we fought against. He stood, moving to the window where pale winter light illuminated Thornwood Park's frost-covered grounds. Worse than that, if the Queen condemns us publicly, she gives permission for every conservative aristocrat to crush reform movements without consequence. The message becomes clear: challenge tradition and face royal disapproval. Our failure doesn't just end the alliance, it prevents anyone else from trying. So we cannot fail. We cannot fail. Which means we have 3 days to prepare an argument that convinces the most powerful woman in England that upending centuries of aristocratic tradition is somehow in her best interest. Susanna crossed to him, her reflection joining his in the frost-etched glass. Then we don't argue tradition versus reform. We argue stability versus chaos. We show her that the alliance prevents revolution by providing legitimate channels for addressing grievances. That coordinated protection for vulnerable women is cheaper than managing the social explosions that happen when injustice becomes unbearable. You're proposing we frame ourselves as conservative force, maintaining order rather than radical movement destroying it. I'm proposing we tell the truth. The alliance exists because the old system was creating increasing amounts of desperation and rage. We didn't cause that. We're managing it, channeling it, preventing it from becoming something far more destructive. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with practiced ease. You understand what we're actually doing here. We're asking the Queen to acknowledge that her aristocracy is broken, that the social contract between power and people has failed so completely that women of quality are organizing secret networks to survive it. Yes, because pretending it's not broken doesn't make it functional. It just means the breaking happens violently instead of through managed reform. Crispin turned from the window, his expression resolved. Then we prepare. We document everything the alliance has accomplished, every woman protected, every predator stopped, every instance where coordinated intervention prevented disaster. We build a case so overwhelming that denying it requires ignoring reality. And if she ignores reality anyway, then we've lost. But at least we'll lose having told the complete truth instead of hiding behind aristocratic pretense. The next 3 days transformed Thornwood Park into headquarters for organized documentation. Catherine Blackwood arrived with records from 23 families, testimony from women who'd been protected, evidence of crimes prevented and lives saved. Lady Pembroke brought financial analysis showing the alliance had actually increased stability in aristocratic marriages by providing alternatives to desperate measures. Fewer scandals, fewer public disasters, fewer situations that required Crown intervention. Duke Harrison of Westmont contributed parliamentary perspective, documenting how alliance activity had reduced certain types of legislation designed purely to consolidate male power at women's expense. The case they built was comprehensive, detailed, and undeniable. It was also politically explosive, because proving the alliance was necessary meant proving aristocratic society was fundamentally unjust, and asking the Queen to support reform meant asking her to acknowledge her own system's failures. The night before their summons, Susanna found Crispin in the library surrounded by documents and half-written speeches. Exhaustion carved lines around his eyes, but his focus remained absolute. She sat across from him without speaking, waiting. He finally looked up, his expression raw. I keep thinking about my mother, about how she died believing compassion was weakness, that caring about people made her vulnerable, that the only way to survive aristocracy was to stop feeling anything. She was wrong. Was she? Because here we are, about to face the Queen, and our entire argument rests on proving that caring about vulnerable people is strategically valuable. We're still speaking the language of utility, still framing human dignity as instrumental to stability rather than inherent right. What's your alternative? Walk into Buckingham Palace and tell the Queen that aristocratic power should be limited because human beings deserve dignity regardless of strategic value? His smile was sharp and exhausted. Yes, actually, that's exactly what I want to say. I want to stand before the most powerful woman in England and tell her that the entire system is morally bankrupt. That tradition doesn't justify cruelty. That power without accountability is just organized predation. But you won't say that, because it would accomplish nothing except satisfying my own conscience. The Queen doesn't care about moral philosophy. She cares about stability, order, preventing chaos that threatens her position. Susanna stood, moving around the desk to face him directly. Then say both. Lead with stability and strategy. Give her the practical arguments she needs to justify supporting us. But end with the truth. End with the fact that some things are worth fighting for, even when they're not strategically optimal. You're asking me to be vulnerable in front of the most powerful person in England, to admit that this is personal, that I'm not just calculating political operator, but someone who actually believes reform matters beyond its tactical utility. Yes, because that's the only argument she hasn't heard before. Every advisor she has will tell her to support or oppose us based on strategic calculation. No one will tell her the truth, that leaders who only make decisions based on power preservation eventually preside over systems so corrupt they collapse. His hand cupped her face with desperate tenderness. You've made me better, more honest, more willing to risk vulnerability for principles. I don't know if that's strength or fatal weakness yet. Maybe it's both. Maybe real strength is being willing to be weak for something that matters. They spent that final night wrapped together in silence, both understanding that tomorrow would determine whether their revolution survived or died. Dawn came too quickly. The carriage ride to Buckingham Palace happened in tense quiet. Crispin wore formal parliamentary robes. Susanna wore deep emerald silk that made her look every inch a duchess. They looked like aristocratic power. They felt like revolutionaries heading toward execution. The palace loomed ahead, its architecture designed to communicate one message clearly. The crown is absolute. Individual ambitions are dust before royal authority. They were shown through corridors lined with portraits of monarchs who'd ruled England for centuries, each one a reminder that challenging royal judgment was historically fatal. The throne room was smaller than expected, more intimate, designed for serious conversation rather than ceremonial display. Queen Victoria sat on a relatively simple chair, dressed in black mourning attire she'd worn since Prince Albert's death decades prior. She was 70, small, and radiated authority that had nothing to do with physical presence and everything to do with 60 years of absolute power. Beside her stood 3 advisors: Lord Chief Justice Rothwell, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and surprisingly, Duke Harrison of Westmont. The Queen spoke first, her voice carrying despite its quietness. Duke Thornwood. Duchess, you've created considerable disruption with your alliance. Half my aristocracy calls you dangerous radicals. The other half calls you necessary reformers. I've summoned you here to determine which assessment is accurate. Crispin bowed with military precision. Your Majesty, we appreciate the opportunity to present our case. You'll have that opportunity. But first, I want you to answer one question honestly. Do you believe aristocratic power as currently structured serves England's best interests? The silence stretched impossibly long. Every person in the room understood this was the test. Honest answer meant admitting the Queen's own system was failing. Diplomatic answer meant proving they were political operators willing to compromise truth for survival. Crispin looked at Susanna once, found resolve in her expression, then faced England's monarch directly. No, Your Majesty, I do not. Gasps from the advisors. The Archbishop looked horrified. Even Rothwell seemed shocked by the bluntness. The Queen's expression didn't change. Explain. Aristocratic power currently functions on the assumption that male heads of households exercise benevolent authority over wives, daughters, and other dependents. But benevolence cannot be assumed. It must be enforced. And current structures provide no enforcement mechanism when that benevolence fails. Go on. The result is systematic vulnerability. Women with no recourse when husbands or fathers or brothers abuse their authority. Widows with no protection when predatory relatives seek to steal estates. Daughters forced into marriages with known abusers because refusal means social destruction. Crispin's voice remained steady, but his words were damning. The alliance exists because aristocratic society creates these vulnerabilities and then punishes women for trying to survive them. We didn't invent the problem. We're simply the first group organized enough to address it systematically. The Archbishop interrupted, his voice sharp with outrage. You're suggesting the entire social order is corrupt, that centuries of tradition are somehow invalid because a few men abuse their positions. Not a few men. Enough men that women of quality are organizing secret networks to protect each other. Enough men that systematic abuse has become normalized rather than exceptional. Susanna spoke for the first time, her voice carrying absolute conviction. Your Majesty, I was widowed at 26 and immediately became prey for my brother-in-law. He attempted to steal my inheritance, destroy my reputation, and force me into compliance through legal manipulation and social pressure.
None of what he did was illegal. All of it was enabled by structures that assume male authority is inherently legitimate. And the Duke rescued you. He offered me strategic partnership that benefited us both. Protection in exchange for household management and social positioning. It was transaction, honest transaction that acknowledged reality instead of hiding behind romantic pretense. The Queen's expression remained unreadable. Yet you claim to love him now. Yes, because transaction can become genuine partnership when both parties are treated as equals rather than owner and property. Because honest terms allow for evolution that deceptive ones prevent. Because he trusted me with real responsibility, and I proved capable of handling it. Susanna stepped forward, abandoning protocol. Your Majesty has ruled England for 60 years. You've exercised power that most women cannot imagine. You've made decisions affecting millions. You've proven that female leadership is not weakness, but strength. I am Queen. My position is unique. Your position proves women are capable of exercising authority competently. The Alliance simply asks that aristocratic society acknowledge what your reign demonstrates, that women can be trusted with real power when given genuine responsibility. The Queen's eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't interrupt. Susanna continued, the current system assumes women need protection through male authority. But your Majesty needed no such protection to rule an empire. You exercise judgment, make strategic decisions, and command respect through competence rather than submission. The Alliance doesn't ask for revolution. It asks for what you already embody, the principle that capability matters more than gender. That protection should come through empowerment rather than subordination. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the Queen spoke, her voice carrying weight of decades ruling the world's most powerful empire. You make compelling arguments, but I notice you're still speaking in terms of strategic value and social stability. Tell me what you actually believe, not what you think I want to hear. Crispin and Susanna exchanged glances, the moment of absolute truth. Crispin spoke first. I believe my father destroyed my mother because society gave him unlimited authority and no accountability. I believe I spent 15 years building myself into a weapon because I watched powerless women devoured by powerful men. I believe the Alliance is my attempt to ensure no other child watches their mother die. Believing compassion is weakness. His voice roughened, and I believe that asking people to submit to authority without recourse is tyranny, regardless of how it's dressed up as tradition. That systems requiring subordination rather than partnership are fundamentally corrupt. That love and respect are stronger foundations than fear and control. The Queen's expression shifted slightly, not approval. Recognition. She turned to Susanna. And you, Duchess? I believe women deserve the same opportunities for dignity that men receive. Not as reward for good behavior, but as inherent right. I believe strategic partnership is stronger than property ownership. I believe my husband became truly powerful only when he stopped viewing vulnerability as weakness. Susanna's voice carried absolute conviction, and I believe that leaders who only preserve power without ensuring justice eventually preside over systems that deserve to fall. That tradition without morality is just organized cruelty with better public relations. The advisors looked horrified. This was beyond political argument. This was fundamental challenge to aristocratic philosophy. The Queen stood slowly, moving to a window overlooking palace gardens. When I took the throne, men told me I needed advisors to make real decisions, that a woman couldn't possibly understand governance or strategy or power. I proved them wrong by being better at ruling than most kings who preceded me. She turned back to face them. But I did not change the system that told them women were incapable. I simply became exception that proved their rule remained intact. I exercised power while leaving structures unchanged that prevented other women from doing the same. Your Majesty, you're asking me to do what I failed to do myself, to acknowledge that the system I've preserved is fundamentally unjust, that my own success as female monarch should have inspired reform rather than serving as excuse to maintain oppression. Her expression was complex, regret mixed with recognition. Tell me honestly, if I support your alliance, what happens to aristocratic stability? Crispin answered immediately. Short-term disruption as families adjust to women having genuine power. Medium-term stabilization as coordinated protection reduces the desperation that leads to scandals and social explosions. Long-term strength because systems built on partnership are more resilient than systems built on subordination. And if I condemn the alliance, women continue organizing in secret,
Resentment builds. Eventually, someone with less restraint and less strategic thinking creates actual revolution rather than managed reform. The choice isn't between stability and change. It's between controlled evolution and chaotic collapse. The Queen returned to her seat, her expression thoughtful. Lord Rothwell, your assessment. The Chief Justice stepped forward. Your Majesty. The alliance has operated for 6 months. During that time, aristocratic stability has actually improved by measurable metrics. Fewer public scandals, fewer legal challenges to estates, fewer situations requiring crown intervention. The Duke's argument about coordinated protection preventing chaos appears supported by evidence. He paused. However, publicly supporting the alliance means acknowledging that aristocratic marriage as currently structured is inadequate. It means giving royal approval to women organizing independent power bases. It means fundamentally altering how English society views authority and subordination. And you recommend? I recommend supporting the alliance with conditions. Make it official rather than underground. Establish clear guidelines for its operations. Transform it from revolutionary network into legitimate social organization with crown oversight. The Archbishop interrupted. Your Majesty cannot seriously consider endorsing an organization that undermines male authority in families. Why not? I've undermined male authority for 60 years. Every decision I make proves women are capable of exercising power competently. The only difference between my reign and the alliance's work is that I inherited my authority while they're demanding theirs. The Queen's smile was sharp. Perhaps it's time aristocratic England acknowledged what my entire reign demonstrates. That competent women are more valuable as partners than as subordinates. She looked directly at Crispin and Susanna. I will support the alliance, but with conditions. First, it becomes official organization rather than secret network. Second, it operates with oversight from crown-appointed advisors who ensure it doesn't become a weapon for settling personal grievances. Third, its stated purpose is protecting vulnerable women rather than undermining male authority generally. Crispin bowed deeply. Your Majesty is generous beyond measure. I am practical beyond sentiment. England's aristocracy needs reform. The alliance provides mechanism for managed change rather than chaotic revolution. Supporting you serves stability even if it challenges tradition. She stood, signaling the audience was ending. But understand this clearly. I'm supporting reform, not revolution. Empowerment, not overthrow. Partnership, not domination. The moment the alliance becomes a weapon for destroying aristocratic power rather than improving it, my support vanishes. We understand completely, Your Majesty. I hope you do. Because I'm giving you something unprecedented. Royal approval for organized female power. Use it wisely or lose it permanently. The dismissal was absolute. They left Buckingham Palace in stunned silence, not quite believing what had happened. The Queen of England had just endorsed their revolution with conditions that transformed it from underground network into legitimate social organization. The carriage ride back to Thornwood Park felt surreal. Susanna finally broke the silence. We won. We survived. That's not the same as winning. Crispin's expression was thoughtful. The Queen gave us legitimacy, but also oversight. Transformed us from revolutionary movement into managed reform. We're no longer dangerous radicals. We're official organization with crown approval and royal supervision. You're disappointed. I'm realistic. She diffused us by embracing us. Made it impossible to build the kind of independent power that could genuinely challenge aristocratic structures. We're now part of the system, rather than threat to it. Susanna studied her husband's face. But women will still be protected, predators will still face consequences, vulnerable families will still have coordinated support. Isn't that what we wanted? It's what we needed. But what I wanted was actual revolution, complete restructuring of how aristocratic power operates. Transformation that made partnership equal to authority rather than subordinate to it. And instead we got managed reform that preserves most existing structures while creating safety valves for worst abuses. His smile was exhausted and genuine. Yes, which is probably the best outcome we could realistically achieve. Revolutionary dreams don't usually survive contact with political reality. Are you satisfied with that? He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with fierce tenderness. I'm satisfied that we changed something, that we built an alliance that will protect women for generations, that we proved partnership can be stronger than domination, that we survived attempted destruction and came out stronger. But part of me will always wonder what would have happened if we'd pushed harder, demanded more, refused to compromise revolutionary principles for political acceptance. Susanna tilted his face toward hers. We would have been crushed. The alliance disbanded. Every woman we've protected left vulnerable. Our revolution would have died before accomplishing anything permanent. I know, which is why we made the right choice. But it still feels like settling for partial victory when complete transformation was so close. Complete transformation was never possible. Not really. We were two people against centuries of tradition backed by absolute power. The fact that we got managed reform instead of execution is miraculous. You're right. I know you're right. But accepting that feels like betraying the version of myself that wanted to burn aristocratic England to ash and rebuild from nothing. She kissed him gently. That version of yourself watched his mother destroyed by systematic cruelty and swore never to feel powerless again. But you're not that terrified child anymore. You're a man who's built something that will outlive you, that will protect people you'll never meet, that will slowly, incrementally make aristocratic society less cruel. That's enough? It has to be. Because perfect revolution isn't coming. Only imperfect progress that requires constant vigilance and endless compromise. They returned to Thornwood Park as heroes of managed reform rather than dangerous radicals. The alliance continued operating with Crown oversight that was surprisingly light. Most of the original network remained intact. New families joined. Protection for vulnerable women became systematized rather than underground. Within a year, aristocratic society had absorbed the change and normalized what had once seemed revolutionary. 5 years later, Susanna stood in Thornwood Park's library looking at shelves now filled with Alliance records. Case files documenting women protected. Predators stopped. Lives saved through coordinated intervention. The organization had grown beyond anything they'd originally imagined. 47 families in England. Expansion into Scotland and Ireland. International connections with similar movements in France and Germany. What had started as desperate network of vulnerable women had become legitimate social force. Crispin found her there, silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, the scar through his eyebrow more prominent with age. Remembering? Evaluating. Trying to determine if what we built matches what we intended. And we intended to protect vulnerable women. We're doing that. We intended to create consequences for predatory men. We're doing that. We intended to prove partnership could be stronger than domination. We've done that. But I keep thinking about the women we didn't save, the ones who were destroyed before the alliance reached them, the ones in families too powerful to challenge, the ones who died believing they were worthless because society told them compassion was weakness. His voice was quiet with old grief. My mother would have been 49 this year, young enough to see what we've built. Old enough to understand that her death wasn't meaningless because it motivated everything that came after. Susanna took his hand, feeling calluses that hadn't been there when they married. Evidence of years working alongside estate managers instead of just commanding them. Your mother's compassion wasn't weakness. It was strength the world wasn't ready to recognize. But we've built something that makes it harder for future generations to make that mistake. Have we? Or have we just created better systems for managing oppression while leaving fundamental power structures intact? The question had haunted him for years. The distance between revolutionary dreams and political reality. Both. We've created better systems and left fundamental structures mostly intact, because destroying everything wasn't actually option despite how satisfying it would have been. She pulled him toward the window overlooking grounds where spring was transforming frost-dead gardens into blooming life. Look at what's actually here. Tenant families who've lived on Thornwood land for generations. Servants who've chosen to stay because this estate treats them fairly. Women who come to alliance meetings in our library and leave with real solutions to real problems. That's not revolution. But it's not nothing either. Crispin wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Sometimes I think about the night I found you in my study reading the investigation files. The moment you realized I'd known everything from the beginning and married you anyway. What about it? That was the moment everything changed. Not when I proposed, not when we survived parliamentary attack, but when you understood that I'd chosen you knowing exactly what that choice cost. And you understood I'd chosen you for the same reason. We were both so broken, so certain that survival required walls and weapons and never admitting to vulnerability. We were wrong. Yes, we were spectacularly wrong. Turns out vulnerability with the right partner is actually strength. Turns out admitting you care about something makes you more dangerous, not less. Turns out love is tactical advantage when both people are equally armed. Is that what we have? Equal armament? You command the alliance. I command political operations. You handle social warfare. I handle parliamentary manipulation. You protect our allies' interests. I destroy our enemies' plans. We're not equal in skills. We're complementary in strengths. She turned in his arms to face him directly. That's partnership, not one person dominating. Both people contributing what they're best at while trusting each other completely. It's also profoundly terrifying, because now I have something to lose, someone who can be hurt to wound me, a vulnerability that enemies will exploit if given opportunity. Then we make sure they're never given opportunity. We stay vigilant. We stay coordinated. We stay absolutely ruthless with anyone who threatens what we've built. Her smile was sharp as his had been years ago. Turns out being loved by the Dragon Duke means becoming a dragon yourself.
You were always a dragon. You just hadn't learned to breathe fire yet. They stood together watching Thornwood Park's grounds transform with spring,
Both understanding that the revolution they'd started would never be complete, that protecting vulnerable people was endless work requiring constant vigilance. But they'd built something that would outlast them, something that would protect women they'd never meet, something that proved partnership could be stronger than domination. That evening, Catherine Blackwood arrived for Alliance Strategy session, along with 20 other women representing England's most influential families. The meeting happened in Thornwood Park's formal dining room, now permanently converted into Alliance headquarters. Blackwood opened with characteristic bluntness. We need to discuss expansion into Wales. 4 families have requested Alliance membership, but their situations are complicated by different legal structures and cultural traditions. The discussion that followed was sophisticated, strategic, and utterly practical. No romantic idealism, no revolutionary rhetoric. Just detailed planning about how to protect vulnerable women within existing power structures. This was what their revolution had become. Not dramatic overthrow, but systematic improvement. Not burning aristocracy to ash, but slowly transforming it into something less cruel. After the meeting ended and guests departed, Susanna found Crispin in his study reviewing estate accounts. Age had made him more handsome somehow. Silver hair, lines around his eyes from years of strategic thinking. The bearing of a man who'd survived everything aristocracy could throw at him and emerged stronger. "What are you thinking about?" He looked up from ledgers, his expression thoughtful. "I'm thinking about the Duke I was when we met. The dragon who believed invulnerability required isolation, who thought caring about people was tactical weakness, who'd built himself into weapon because weapons can't be hurt. That Duke was terrifying. That Duke was lonely. Surrounded by people, but utterly isolated because genuine connection meant potential exploitation. And now? Now I'm terrifying for completely different reasons. Because I have something worth protecting beyond my own survival. Because I'll burn the world to keep you safe. Because vulnerability has made me ruthless in ways isolation never could." His smile was genuine and slightly dangerous. Turns out the Dragon Duke was never actually invulnerable. I was just too afraid to admit I wanted something more than power. What did you want? This. Partnership with someone equally dangerous. Love that makes me stronger rather than weaker. The knowledge that when I die, something I built will continue protecting people. That's legacy without bloodline. It's better than bloodline. Because children inherit titles and estates whether they deserve them or not. But institutions like the Alliance have to earn continued existence by actually accomplishing their stated purposes. You've become philosopher. I've become man who's had 15 years to think about what actually matters. Turns out it's not traditional legacy, not aristocratic dominance, not even political power. What then? Knowing you changed something for the better. That vulnerable people are safer because you existed. That the world is slightly less cruel because you fought against cruelty even when victory was never guaranteed. He stood, crossing to where she waited. I spent my entire life before you building walls, collecting weapons, making myself untouchable through fear and strategy. And I was absolutely miserable. When did that change? The night you confessed you'd lied about your infertility. The moment you stood in my study terrified I would reject you, and I realized I'd never actually wanted an heir. I wanted you, just you, exactly as you were. His hand cupped her face with infinite tenderness. That was the night the Dragon Duke died, replaced by something far more dangerous,
a man who had something worth protecting. And what did I become? The Duchess who breathes fire. The strategist who manages alliance operations. The woman who stood in Parliament and defended our partnership against the entire aristocratic establishment. You became the thing I needed most without knowing I needed it. An equal partner instead of subordinate. Someone who challenges me and supports me and occasionally tells me I'm being an idiot when I deserve it. Only occasionally? Don't push your luck. They laughed together, the sound carrying through Thornwood Park's ancient halls that had witnessed generations of aristocratic cruelty and were now headquarters for organized resistance to it. That night, lying together in darkness, Susanna asked the question that had haunted her for years. Do you regret it? Any of it? The parliamentary attack? The royal summons? The compromise that transformed revolution into managed reform? Crispin was quiet for a long time before answering. I regret that we couldn't do more. That we had to compromise revolutionary principles for political survival. That women are still dying in situations the Alliance can't reach. But do I regret fighting? Regret building something that protects vulnerable people, even if it's not a perfect solution? Regret finding partnership with you? Never. Not for 1 second. His arms tightened around her. We changed what we could change. Protected who we could protect. Built something that will outlast us. That's not complete victory, but it's not failure either. It's human. Flawed, but meaningful. Yes. Which is better than being the invulnerable dragon who accomplished nothing except maintaining his own isolation. Years later, when Crispin Mercer, Duke of Thornwood, finally died at 73, the funeral was attended by over 300 families, not out of fear, not out of political obligation, but out of genuine respect for a man who'd spent his life fighting against cruelty. The alliance he and Susanna built continued operating for another 50 years, protecting thousands of women and fundamentally altering how English society viewed aristocratic marriage and female autonomy. His legacy wasn't bloodline. It was systematic change that made the world measurably less cruel. Susanna outlived him by 7 years, continuing to run alliance operations with the same strategic brilliance she'd demonstrated from the beginning. When she died, her final words were recorded by Catherine Blackwood, who'd become closest friend and alliance successor. Tell them we were not victims who got lucky. We were survivors who refused to accept that survival was the best we deserved. Tell them partnership is possible even in systems designed to prevent it. Tell them love and strategy aren't opposites. Tell them the Dragon Duke was never a monster. He was just a man who learned that vulnerability with the right partner is the strongest armor possible. The alliance Crispin and Susanna built eventually evolved into a broader social reform movement that contributed to women's suffrage and property rights reforms in early 20th century England. Their story became legend whispered in drawing rooms where women gathered to plan resistance against systematic oppression. Not the legend of rescue, not the fantasy of romantic love conquering all obstacles, but the harder, truer story of two broken people who built partnership from strategic necessity and discovered that honest transaction could become genuine love when both parties were treated as equals. The story of the Dragon Duke who learned that breathing fire was less powerful than building something worth protecting. The story of the Duchess who proved that being loved by a dangerous man was only revolutionary when she was equally dangerous herself. The story of aristocratic marriage that started as calculated rescue and became something infinitely more valuable. Proof that systems built on partnership are stronger than systems built on subordination. That vulnerability with the right person is strength. That love without equality is just another form of control. That changing the world doesn't require perfect revolution. Only imperfect people willing to fight for incremental progress, despite knowing complete victory is impossible. And in the end, that was enough. Not everything they wanted, not total transformation, but enough to make their lives meaningful. Enough to protect people who came after them. Enough to prove that challenging centuries of tradition was possible, even if the results were messy and compromised and imperfect. The Dragon Duke and his Duchess left behind something more valuable than bloodline or title or political power. They left behind proof that partnership can survive in systems designed to prevent it. That coordinated resistance is stronger than isolated suffering. That two people refusing to accept cruelty as inevitable can build something that outlasts their own lives. That love is tactical advantage when both people are equally armed. That revolution doesn't require burning everything to ash. Sometimes it just requires refusing to accept that the current system is the only system possible.
And sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is admit you care about something more than your own survival. Because people with nothing to lose are terrifying, but people with something worth protecting are absolutely unstoppable. This is a completely fictional work created solely for entertainment and dramatic storytelling purposes.